Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Whisper. Tonight we journey deep into America's most mysterious and isolated region, the Appalachian Mountains. Stretching across 13 states, these mountains hold more than fog, forests, and forgotten trails. They hold people, the ones who walked away from society generations ago and never came back. What you're about to hear are 7 of the most disturbing true encounters ever documented with what locals call the feral people of Appalachia. Communities that live completely off the grid, unseen by civilization, surviving in the hidden hollows and abandoned mining towns that time forgot. These are not myths, not campfire tales, and not online creepypastas. Each case you'll hear tonight has been cross-verified with police reports, ranger logs, and first-hand testimony from those who came face-to-face with something that was once human. And perhaps still is, from hikers who vanished without a trace to forest workers who found worship where no church should exist. Every encounter reveals a darker truth buried beneath. Appalachia's endless canopy, if you appreciate thoroughly researched horror content that exposes the hidden corners of reality. Make sure to subscribe to Shadow Whisper and activate the notification bell so you never miss when the darkness descends. Now turn down the lights, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself for 7 true Appalachian encounters that will make you question what's really watching from the woods. Liam Carter had been a field ranger with the Tennessee Parks Division for nearly 15 years. Long enough to understand that the Appalachian wilderness keeps its own time, its own rules, and its own silence. The forest didn't owe anyone explanations, it simply endured. By late March 2023, Liam was assigned to night patrol rotation in the restricted buffer zone that bordered the North Carolina state line, a stretch known on internal maps as Ridge 7. The job was straightforward. Verify that no hunters or off-trail campers had slipped past the signage, log weather readings, and inspect the old firebreak road for erosion. He preferred these shifts, the isolation, the discipline of routine. Most rangers complained about the loneliness. Liam welcomed it. At 8:47 p.m., he checked in by radio from marker E21. Dispatch confirmed clear conditions. Fog minimal, temperature 42 degrees. He noted the details in his patrol log, clipped the flashlight to his vest, and continued along the maintenance track that wound through stands of oak and rhododendron. For the first 2 hours, everything was textbook. Distant owl calls, the hiss of wind through leafless branches, the occasional snap of frost-stiff underbrush beneath his boots. Then, at 10:16 p.m., he caught something off. Tracks in the soft clay just beyond the gate where no one should have been. They were barefoot impressions, large but strangely shaped, the toes fanned wide like a hand pressed flat into mud. He crouched, measured the stride with his flashlight. Roughly 3 feet between steps, depth uneven as if the person moved fast, almost loping. No shoe treads, no drag marks, no secondary prints from an animal companion. Just those human but not prints leading downslope toward the ravine. Standard procedure said photograph, flag, and report before entering restricted terrain. But the prints were fresh, edges sharp, moisture still pooled in the heel cups. Whoever made them had passed minutes ago. The veteran instinct that usually warned him off was quiet tonight, replaced by something colder, more clinical. Curiosity. He radioed in. Dispatch, Ridge 7. Possible unauthorized presence. Following sign-off main trail. The reply cracked through static. Copy that. Maintain line of sight and report location every 10. He clipped the mic back and descended. As he moved deeper, the forest swallowed ambient noise. Even his breathing felt too loud. He clicked off the flashlight for a moment to test the darkness, immediate, total. When he switched it back on, mist was forming, rolling in low from the creek bed below. The beam caught specks of moisture like falling ash. 20 minutes later, the slope leveled into a narrow clearing about 15 feet across. At its center, the ground looked disturbed. Leaf litter scraped away, red clay exposed in a rough oval. He knelt, brushed the soil with gloved fingers. Compact, tamped down deliberately. His light drifted over the depression and stopped. The ground wasn't just disturbed, it was open. A pit roughly 4 feet deep. Its edges were clawed, not dug clean with a spade. The interior glistened wetly, lined with something that caught the light in dull gray-brown patches. He stepped closer, heartbeat a measured drum in his ears. Animal hides, layered like insulation. Deer, raccoon, maybe bear. And mixed within, bones. Hundreds of them. Some intact, some shattered. Liam swallowed against the metallic smell rising from below. Rot, musk, and something else faint but distinct. Human decay. He steadied the camera, snapped 3 frames. Each click sounded too loud. Then his beam slid across a torn flannel shirt half buried under the hides, and beside it a single hiking boot, size 11. Sole worn smooth. Every ranger eventually finds death in the woods, a mauled deer, an old hunter's skeleton. But this wasn't the forest reclaiming the careless. This was arranged, intentional. He pulled his radio again. Dispatch Ridge 7 marking potential forensic site. Coordinates incoming, Gweno. Only static. He tried again. Nothing. The mist was thickening fast, compressing sound like a blanket. Liam pocketed the radio, telling himself it was interference from the valley, and reached for his camera again. That was when he noticed the figure on the far side of the pit. A shape crouched low behind the trunk of a dead oak. He froze. The beam wavered across rough bark, then skin, pallid and stretched thin across ribs. The shape was motionless, almost sculptural, until the head tilted slightly and eyes, black, unreflective, caught the light. Liam's throat went dry. He couldn't tell if it was a man starved to the edge of death or something wearing human shape out of memory. They stared at each other across the pit, the silence absolute. Then the figure smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just the smallest curl of lips that exposed teeth broken into points. Liam's instincts returned all at once. He staggered back, flashlight jerking. The beam hit empty space. The figure was gone. He backed up until his heel met the slope, then turned and ran. The forest seemed to shift around him, branches clawing, fog thickening. Somewhere behind, leaves rustled in deliberate pursuit. He didn't stop until the reflective tape of his ATV shimmered through the dark like salvation. He threw himself onto the seat, engine roaring to life, and tore uphill toward the ranger station. He didn't look back. The floodlights of the station parking lot washed Liam in hard white. He let the ATV idle until the engine sputtered out, hands fixed on the handlebars as if unclenching might let the forest pull him back. When he finally stood, his legs trembled. Not from the ride, he told himself, but from adrenaline burn-off. Inside, he moved on training. Door, logbook, phone. He dialed the duty line instead of radio. Cell signal at the station was reliable. He kept his tone steady and procedural. Possible forensic site in the Ridge 7 buffer. Coordinates en route. Human remains suspected. Evidence of organized arrangement. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Copy, hold position. 2 rangers and county deputies en route. ETA 40 minutes. Do not return to site alone, he didn't argue. He wrote the coordinates twice, once in the log, once on a sticky note. Then he printed a rough map tile from the station terminal and highlighted the path he'd taken, marking the stream crossing and the clearing with a square so dark the paper began to pill. He washed his hands at the sink and realized, when warm water hit his skin, that they were shaking so badly he'd splashed the counter. He dried them slowly, folded the towel, and sat where he could see the door. When the backup arrived, the room filled with the practical noise of people who believe problems yield to paperwork and light. Boots, Velcro, the rough cough of quiet men clearing their throats. Ranger Alvarez, broad-shouldered and unflappable. Ranger Meade, younger, leaning toward skepticism to hide nerves. 2 deputies from the county, Kincaid and Porter. Everyone wore sidearms. The deputies carried long guns cased in nylon. Liam briefed them. He kept it factual. Coordinates, materials in the pit, the smell, the artifacts, flannel shirt, size 11 boot, wire rim glasses. He saved the last part for last. There was a figure, he said. Across the pit, human-shaped, emaciated, watching. Meade's mouth tugged up at one corner. Squatter? Maybe, Alvarez said carefully. Let's verify the scene. They went out under hard stars in the thinner kind of March cold that makes plastic feel brittle. The ride back was slower, engines damped, light bars off. They walked the last half mile on foot with beams low to preserve night sight. Liam found his flags, the reflective tape he'd tied on saplings shining like animal eyes, and led them down through the laurel. The clearing looked almost normal in their pooled light. Just another bald patch where leaf litter failed to catch. But then the angle changed and the pit absorbed the beams like a mouth. Kincaid muttered, Jesus. Alvarez swung to procedure. Porter perimeter tape, Meade body cam on. Liam, Show us the items. They worked clean. Photographs first, then evidence numbers on cardstock tented near objects. The flannel, the bent glasses, the boot with its sole rounded off by miles. Porter called out bone classifications to a recorder app as if he'd done it in light before. Femurs, ribs, vertebrae. He was careful. He did not guess at human unless he was sure. The smell sat heavy over everything, a wet metal tang braided with musk. And beneath it, that wrong note Liam couldn't name without saying human, so he didn't. He just kept breathing through his mouth. "Look here," Alvarez said softly. He'd found it half buried against the hide lining, a crude figure bound from twigs and sinew, an 18-inch doll with a slab of bark for a face, 2 burnt holes for eyes. Human hair had been knotted through the lashings, pale and dark both, different textures as if it had been collected. Alvarez slid it into a bag with a practiced gentleness that made Liam like him more and feel worse at the same time. They found no fresh footprints besides Liam's earlier tracks and their own. No broken branches where something might have dropped from a tree. No caloric shine of a heat signature beyond their group when deputies scanned with a pocket thermal. The forest had reset itself as indifferent as a courtroom. "Bag and flag," Kincaid said finally. "We'll call the ME. Scene'll need a daylight team." By 0340, evidence was tagged and the pit canvassed. Alvarez looked at the hides lining the walls and said what nobody wanted to say. "We're not leaving this open." They worked with shovels from the ATVs, moving dirt like men trying to erase a word from a page. The sound was loud and ugly in the quiet. When the last of the red clay slumped in and made the depression a smear that could pass as windfall erosion, Alvarez taped a square of caution around the clearing and logged the GPS one more time. Back at the station, Liam wrote until his hand cramped. He included details his future self would want. Timestamps, coordinates, which deputy said what. He did not describe the smile he'd seen on the figure. He wrote, "Observed possible occupant across pit, human parity uncertain," and left it at that. Forensics didn't arrive until late afternoon. They were state, efficient and unsentimental. Bright tape and numbered flags and polite questions asked 3 times as if answers changed with repetition. They took soil samples, hair samples, swabbed the inside of the boot, bagged the flannel. The medical examiner's assistant lifted a single long bone with gloved care, and even through 2 layers of nitrile, Liam could see the difference in shape. The bulbous head of a femur that belonged to a human, not deer. He went home near dusk, showered too hot and too long, and stared at the steam until it thinned to ordinary air. He slept in fragments and woke to the sound of wind that he kept mishearing as breath. The preliminary report came back 3 days later. Alvarez slid the printout across Liam's desk like a teacher returning a test. Animal remains consistent with deer, raccoon, small mammals, 1 human femur, positive ID pending dental comparison. Other artifacts, clothing fragments from multiple manufacturers, dates indeterminate. "And the doll?" Liam asked, "catalogued as ritualized object." Alvarez's mouth didn't move when he said it, like he didn't want to give the word a shape in the room. He'd barely finished the page when the call came from admin. A voice he didn't know, measured and pleasant. "Thank you for your report. The site was dismantled by Wildlife Resources on safety grounds. The official language would be, evidence of unauthorized camping removed according to protocol. Any further media inquiries should be directed to communications." "Understood," Liam said, "because that was what you said when people reminded you who wrote the sentences that became reality." That night he drove the perimeter roads without getting out. He told himself it was routine. In the wash of his high beams, he saw small things left in places that made them seem larger. A circle of stones at the base of a fence post, each stone the same size. A length of twine looped over a trailgate latch tightened until it bit the wood. His missing glove hung on a sapling, fingers pointing toward Ridge 7 as clearly as an arrow. He stopped the truck and sat with the engine off until the cold began to press through the windows. He didn't retrieve the glove. He didn't want to reach out his arm into the dark. 2 days later, he went back on duty. The station smelled like coffee and whiteboard marker, and something else he didn't want to think about that might only be his own memory. He filed updated check-in procedures. Every 30 minutes on the dot. No solo deviations from maintained paths. No off-trail follow-ups at night. At 21:06, he parked where the fire break began and stood listening. Silence, then the ordinary chorus. The low static of wind moving branches against each other. A distant trickle where the creek thinned itself over stone. Then a sound that wasn't ordinary. A soft whistle. 4 notes. Not musical exactly. More like someone trying to remember how music worked. He froze, the cleanness of the cold suddenly gone. The notes repeated, nearer. The exact rhythm of the line he had used to test his radio earlier. A nothing tune, 3 short and 1 long. He raised his light without thinking and watched the beam through the trees. 50 feet out, something moved. A shoulder sliding behind a trunk in a motion too smooth for deer. He didn't see a face. He didn't need to. The whistle came again, now from his left, the same 4 notes as if the forest were a speaker with multiple channels. He backed to the truck and got in. He didn't speed. He closed the door, locked it, turned the key, and drove a steady legal pace back down the road, hands white on the wheel. The next morning there was a print on his windshield. Not a hand. Not quite. 5 pressure arcs in a fan, spaced too far apart to belong to anything that wore boots. He washed it off before the sun hit it full and baked the oil into the glass. He watched the water take it away and did not feel relief. He wrote it in his notebook instead. He added a date and the words he'd learned to use when truth didn't fit policy. Observation recorded. Origin unknown. Spring came late that year. Rain turned the ridgeline slick and the fog off the creek sat for days at a time, thick enough to mute birdsong and make distance meaningless. Ridge 7 remained closed to the public under a maintenance advisory that nobody outside the department cared to question. For 3 weeks, Liam avoided that section entirely. He kept to paperwork, school groups, and routine trail checks closer to the visitor center. He convinced himself that was prudence, not fear. Then, on a clear April morning, Alvarez stopped by his desk with a thin envelope. "Dental results," he said. "You should see this." Inside were 2 pages from the state medical examiner's office. The human femur from the pit matched dental records for Marcus Webb, a construction worker missing since 2021. Another artifact, the flannel, tested positive for blood from 2 separate donors, neither Webb. The official summary at the bottom used neutral words. Case referred to federal jurisdiction. Local follow-up not required. That should have been the end. But bureaucratic endings rarely stop human questions. That night, long after the others left, Liam sat alone in the ranger office scrolling through the open-source database of missing persons in eastern Tennessee. He filtered by last seen near Roan Mountain. 27 names appeared. 8 of them, including Webb, were tagged search concluded, unrecovered. He clicked through photos until the faces blurred together. Hikers, hunters, a geology student, a retired couple, all lost within 50 miles of Ridge 7. He printed the list, folded it into his pocket, and told himself it was only research. Yet 2 nights later, he found himself driving the switchback road again, headlights slicing fog that seemed to build deliberately ahead of him. He parked at the same pull-off where the glove had hung. The glove was gone. In its place lay a neat stack of stones, each smaller than the one beneath it, 7 in all. He turned off the engine. The silence pressed in. He walked with only a flashlight and the automatic awareness of terrain learned through years of night patrol. Branches brushed his sleeves. The air smelled of iron and wet bark. At 22:03, he reached the clearing. Nothing. The soil they had used to fill the pit had settled, a shallow bowl of red clay veined with roots. He crouched to touch it, cool, solid, ordinary. Then his light picked up movement, a flicker low to the ground near the far tree line. He froze, beam steady. It was a child's toy, something small and angular rolling in the faint breeze. A stick figure doll, fresh twine, bark still sappy where the knots crossed. The hair bound into it was blonde, short, clean. He should have left then. Instead, he photographed it, the shutter bright in the dark. When the flash faded, the sound reached him. The same guttural whistle, soft at first, then echoed by another. And another. They came from uphill, then behind, forming a half circle of sound that tightened the air around him. Liam turned slowly. The mist wasn't thick yet, but it carried movement, shadows sliding between trunks. He counted at least 3, shapes maybe 4, moving in concert like predators flanking prey. He spoke aloud, voice firm out of training habit. "This area is restricted. Identify yourselves." The forest answered with silence. Then from his right, a whisper repeated his words. Not mocking, just exact, tone and cadence identical. "This area is restricted. Identify yourselves." The echo came again, nearer, fragmented through multiple throats, repeating fragments of his own command, overlapping until language broke into rhythm. He backed toward the slope, flashlight sweeping. The beam caught eyeshine, pairs of dark orbs set in faces that looked more bone than skin, mud-streaked, expressionless. For a heartbeat they froze, as if waiting for his next move. Then one stepped forward into the light, and Liam saw that it wasn't stepping toward him. It was mimicking him, matching his posture, hand raised at the same angle as his flashlight. He stumbled, broke the pattern. The figure stopped too, cocking its head like a confused animal. The others behind it shifted, uncertain. For an instant, the clearing held that delicate balance between action and restraint. And then something, some ancient instinct of survival, snapped inside him. He turned and ran. The descent blurred into noise and breath. He hit the gravel track, slipped, regained balance, ran until the truck appeared through fog like a gray ghost. He drove without looking in the mirror, headlights burning tunnels through white. At the station he wrote nothing. Not that night, not the next. He deleted the new photos from his camera and told Alvarez he'd found nothing unusual on his final inspection. The lie tasted metallic but necessary. A week later, Alvarez mentioned that Wildlife Resources had filled the pit again after heavy rain caused a minor collapse. "Standard erosion control," he said. "So it's sealed for good." Liam nodded. He didn't tell him the truth, that the soil had already been disturbed before the rain, that the doll he'd seen had been new. He kept working. Routine saves men like him. Inventory forms, radio checks, tire pressure logs. Yet small inconsistencies began to surface. Tools left at one site appeared miles away the next day, clean and sharpened. His lunch cooler vanished from the truck and reappeared 2 mornings later on his doorstep, lid closed, ice still unmelted. One evening in late May, while filing trail reports, he received an internal email. Subject, missing, Ranger Mead. Last check-in, Ridge 7 Sector E19, 1942. HR's search teams combed the area for 3 days. They found Mead's ATV overturned near a dry creek bed, engine cold. The only item recovered intact was his camera. Inside were 16 photos. The first 14 were ordinary, trail markers, erosion shots. The 15th showed a shallow clearing, disturbed red soil, and a crude twig figure half buried near the frame's edge. The 16th was black except for a faint shape in the lower right corner. A face close to the lens, eyes wide, skin smeared with mud. Human, yes, but wrong in proportion, as if the bones beneath had remembered a different arrangement. The official statement to media was short. Ranger missing, search suspended due to terrain hazards. Liam still has a copy of that 16th photo. He keeps it folded in the back of his incident notebook, though he tells himself he should destroy it. Sometimes, during night shifts, he opens it under his desk lamp and studies the grain. The face is blurred by motion, but in the corner, just visible through the streak of mud, he can make out a faint reflection in one of the eyes. A bright beam, perfectly circular. A flashlight beam, his beam. He shuts the notebook then, always fast, always with the same thought looping quiet as a prayer. The mountains watch back. They remember who found their secrets, and they wait for him to return. Caleb Rhodes had been a contract survey technician for the U.S. Forest Service long enough to stop romanticizing maps. Contours were just math. The cranberry backcountry, on the other hand, was weather that forgot it owed anyone a schedule. His spring assignment sounded simple on paper. Verify stream adjustments along 3 drainages on the north side of Fenwick Mountain. Update culvert recommendations. and flag potential reroutes before the seasonal hikers arrived. He signed the itinerary at the ranger office in Richwood on a Wednesday morning, April 10, 2024. Check-ins at 10 where ATMR and as coverage allows. The clerk behind the glass slid him a clipboard and told him, kindly, almost absently, to keep to high ground if the fog rolled fast. "It stacks in bowls," she said, as if talking about soup. He parked at an old service gate, shouldered 30 pounds of gear, and hiked in by compass and habit. Caleb worked alone most contracts. He preferred the steady gait of his own pace. The route followed a ribbon of water up valley, then cut cross-slope through laurel and hemlock so dense it felt curated. He placed survey flags, photographed cutbanks, and logged flow velocities in a field app that crashed only when he needed it not to. At 1640, he found a shelf above the creek with a flat enough bench for a tent and just enough sky to convince him he'd see stars. He hung the food line properly, 15 feet off the ground and 6 feet from the trunk. He boiled noodles, wrote coordinates by headlamp, and as the temperature dropped, listened to the creek resetting rocks it didn't like. At 21:18, a low fog began gate crashing the understory, a white drift sliding in from the notch like a slow spill. Caleb had worked mountain fog before, thin veils that take distance and leave sound. This came with weight. His headlamp beam shortened from a neat 40 feet to 10 to 8, then 6. Sound softened until the creek was only pressure against the ear. He tested his phone. No bars. He tried the radio anyway. A fragment of dispatch, tinny and then gone as if spoken underwater. He turned off the lamp to listen better. The quiet wasn't empty. It was padded. He could hear his own breath as a texture. Then from somewhere in the fog to his northeast, the cry started. It wasn't a scream. It was raw, small, and staggered, as if someone were trying not to cry and failing. Caleb's first instinct was the trained one. Lost hiker. He grabbed the lamp and called out his name and role. Voice measured in that practiced way field workers learn to sound calm for people who've burned through their own calm. "Hello, I'm with the Forest Service. If you can hear me, answer back. I have light." The crying stopped mid-breath. The kind of abrupt cut you hear when a recording ends. He waited, counted to 60, called again. Nothing. He considered walking a slow circle to triangulate the sound, but the fog already had him on a short leash. He zipped the tent, sat with the lamp off and listened until somewhere around midnight the weight of sleep pinned him down. He woke at 03:12 to crying again. This time it came from the south, closer, 20, maybe 30 yards. A woman's voice, he thought at first, except the timbre kept changing, as if the throat that made it forgot how it used to sound. He raised the zipper an inch and shone the beam along the ground. Particles sparked and vanished in the cone of light. He called out once, quieter. The crying softened and a whisper took its place, a soft string of syllables he could almost but not quite recognize as words. He made the decision, the one that splits field workers into those who go home early and those who don't, and stayed in the tent. He gripped the knife he carried more from training than belief, and listened to the whispers draw lazy circles through the trees. They moved with a purpose that wasn't his. At dawn, the fog thinned toward transparency. The creek came back as sound, and in that loosening of air he finally slept. By mid-morning, with a watch that said or 9:47 and light you could trust, he found the prints. They circled the tent in wide arcs, in close approaches, then arcs again, as if pacing decisions had been made in the dark while he lay still pretending not to breathe. Bare feet, adult size, but longer than the ones he knew. The forefoot broad and the toes splayed like a fan pressed too hard into mud. The big toe sat almost straight ahead instead of angled inward, and the second toe ran long. He took photos with a metal rule for scale. He made a plaster cast of the cleanest impression, because that was what one did when the ground left you notes. While the cast set, he found 2 more details he couldn't write off. A cut in the food line rope, clean like blade work, and a small, dry bundle near a root. A twig figure bound with sinew, palm length with a curl of hair knotted through its center. The hair was auburn and clean, more Ceylon than forest. His radio worked for exactly 1 check-in at noon. He reported the prints, the cut rope, the bundle. Dispatch acknowledged with a bored professionalism that said call volume. He logged, reset, and kept working because the job, like the creek, moves around obstacles it can't resolve. The fog returned at 17:10 as if drawn by appointment. Caleb heated soup he didn't want, zipped the tent earlier than Pride allowed, and set the lamp on low. He forced himself through the protocols he'd taught new techs: inventory, comms test, knife accessible, boots laced, pack ready. He told his chest to loosen and his jaw to stop chewing its own muscle. At 22:03, the crying began again. 3 notes of grief that fell and rose like someone trying to teach a child to say help. This time the voice spoke his first name between sobs. Not always right, sometimes Cal, but close enough to make his stomach drop. He didn't answer. He changed batteries in the headlamp by feel. He placed his palm against the tent wall when the voice came within arm's length and felt, beneath the thin fabric, the slow pass of heat, breath. Then a single fingertip dragged across the nylon, a line from zipper to floor that snagged on nothing and left no tear. He stayed still. At 04:50, just before the fog lightened, the crying stopped as if dismissed. When he finally unzipped the tent, the ground looked clean until the angle of sun reversed every track and showed them all at once. New prints overlapped last night's, fresher, deeper. They led away toward the creek, then upstream. Then into Laurel, too tight for a man with a pack. Caleb packed in 9 minutes and left in 8, which is fast when you're trying not to run. He followed his own flag line back toward the service gate, relief rising with each orange tag. At the second to last flag, something small hung from the branch below it, swaying in air that wasn't moving. Another twig bundle. This one had 2 curls of hair, one dark, one blonde, knotted at the throat. The bark face had 2 holes burned where eyes should be. He photographed it because discipline is a kind of superstition. Then he kept walking until asphalt looked like a promise. He didn't go home. He drove to the ranger office, handed in a report thick with coordinates, and asked for a second night authorization with a partner to verify Stream 2B and document anomalous acoustic events. The clerk glanced at the request, then at him. "You want company?" "I want someone to hold a camera when I point," Caleb said. His voice sounded like it belonged to a man who hadn't slept in a bed in a long time. He got his partner, seasonal, law enforcement ranger named Shay Delaney, who kept her hair in a short braid and wrote notes on the back of her hand when paper wasn't handy. She listened without interrupting, then said only, "We keep the trail. We don't follow voices. If we see kids, we don't assume kids." She slid a spare radio across the desk. "Log every 10. They agreed to be at the gate by 15, to reach the shelf by 17, or to set camp before the fog arrived, as if fog followed clocks. It didn't. It followed them. They reached the shelf at 16:52 with the kind of speed you use when you want to arrive before something else does. Shay walked the perimeter like any good ranger, wide then tight, reading ground the way a nurse reads a face. She found the same fan-toed prints fresher. She crouched, touched the edge of one with 2 fingers and smelled them. "Not deer," she said. "Not bear. Human oil. Could be unshod, could be not modern feet, meaning someone who's never worn real shoes. Bone spreads if it's never trained." Caleb showed her the hair-twined bundle. Shay bagged it in a quart Ziploc with a business-like neatness that made the object look smaller and worse. They set 2 small trail cameras on the approach routes, one low at shin height, one high aimed down, the way you do when you're learning whether a thing stands upright all the time. They marked a line of fishing bells, cheap and effective, between saplings at knee height so anything moving would ring small metal truths Caleb could record with a timestamp. At 17:29, the fog changed sound. The creek went from one tone to another like a hand over a mouth. Shay checked both radios. They clicked and hissed like annoyed insects. She shrugged unbothered and pointed to the tent, inside. Light discipline, low and steady. "You hear a child? You tell me before you think you know what it is." In the tent, their breath condensed into the kind of damp that turns paper soft. The watch ticked to 18-hour, then 19:30, then the hour where body heat wants to drop and the mind starts walking ahead of itself. Caleb kept notes on a small write in the rain pad. 1941, bell south. I-46, faint bell north. 22:52, no wind. 20:06, something brushed fly. 20:12. Crying begins east. The crying threaded through fog like a string through fabric. Shay raised a hand and Caleb shut up mid-whisper, though he wasn't sure he'd started one. The voice was softer tonight, or smarter. It didn't say help. It said, "I'm cold," with little stutters that dropped syllables. "I'm key old." A tweak wrong enough to make it feel like a practice exercise. A second voice joined farther out, repeating the first with a heel drag in timing like someone learning a language by echo. "Don't answer," Shay said.
Headlamps off.
"Tape the zipper tab so it can't rattle." The voices circled the camp at a steady walking pace. The bells chimed once, then twice, and then, unnerving in its own way, stopped entirely, as if hands had found them and stilled them. Shay unclipped her service pistol but kept it low. Her posture said, "Don't be the first to escalate." Caleb's pen dug a crease in the notebook that his hand would remember days later. At 21:58, the crying shifted to something Caleb had not yet heard: laughter. Not sudden, not manic, just low chuckles poorly fitted into human cadence. The sort of laughter a child makes when an adult tells them to laugh for a picture. It moved at a height that wasn't quite right. Too low for adult shoulders, too high for knees. He scribbled laughter, height unknown. The zipper pulled tight against the fly as if someone pinched it from outside and tested the resistance. Shay placed 2 fingers against the line, and the pressure eased, like a hand that recognized a hand and paused to decide what to do next. Then the whispering started, close enough for warmth to leak through the fabric. Words, "Open." Then fainter, as if relayed, "Open." The relay continued around the tent until the whole circle seemed to practice the same small command in different throats. Shay leaned to Caleb's ear. "We hold. If they cut, we bolt for the shelf's western drop and light the flares." They didn't cut. They imitated the sound of cutting, a slow rasp like a blade on nylon without the tear. The kind of theater that makes the audience's nerves do the work, steel would have done faster. At 22:41, a bell rang clean to the north. 2 seconds later, another to the west, then one behind them, not on their line at all. Caleb realized something he should have earlier. Bells tell you what touches bells. They do not tell you what knows bells exist in steps wide. Shay whispered, "They're counting us." "How many?" "Enough." He didn't ask enough for what. The fog pressed so close that the tent walls breathed with it. Caleb turned the headlamp to its lowest setting, just enough to catch the outline of Shay's forearm and the faint reflection of the pistol's rear sight. He wanted to ask her if this was normal in some catalog of field experiences veteran rangers share in bars and never put in reports, but the shape of her jaw said not now, and the big muscle in his own throat said nothing at all. At 23:03, the crying returned, only now it used Caleb's voice. Not a perfect copy, but his vowel length, his tired rhythm. It said, "Shay?" with a question mark that sounded like his. From farther out, it used Shay's voice asking, "Caleb?" the way she had said it at the trailhead. He wrote the words and underlined them until the paper broke. "Don't engage," Shay said, as if training were something you could hand to a person like equipment. At Echun 017, a sound slid under the door's threshold, a slow spill like poured sand. Caleb shone the beam low for half a second, and they both saw a bare foot stop just shy of the light. It was pallid, long, and dirty in the clean way of oil, not mud. The toes fanned. The second toe was too long. The foot withdrew without flinch when the light found it. Shay whispered into the radio anyway. "Ranger Delaney, Sector Cranberry North Shelf requesting any unit check. Situation, multiple unknowns near tent." Static answered, long and dry. It went on for hours like a rehearsal. The voices cried, laughed, echoed commands. The bells stayed quiet. Sometimes something brushed the tent with fingertips that knew fabrics. Sometimes breath warmed the mesh. More than once, Caleb thought he could hear sniffing, the wet kind, like an animal deciding if a thing was food or a problem. At 04:32, the fog began to lift in imperceptible increments, the black grading to charcoal, then slate. The pressure in the air let go of a fraction of itself. The voices kept to the performance rules and faded with the fog, as if constrained by the same light that unstitched them. They waited 20 full minutes. Then Shay unzipped with a steadiness that felt like a gift. The clearing was empty except for prints. The bells were still. The camera on the low line had rotated slightly, as if a hand had tested its bracket and decided to reposition for a better shot. They packed without speaking, eyes doing the work. Words would only slow. At the second camera, Shay checked the SD card, slid it into a plastic case and taped it shut. "We'll view at the office," she said. On the hike out at the very first flag, they both stopped. Tied to the tag was a neat braid made of 2 colors of hair, dark brown and auburn, bound at each end with fiber stripped from inner bark. The braid was about 8 inches long. It was too clean to have lived on the ground. Evidence, Shay said. She bagged it gingerly, as if roughness might change what it meant. Back at the office, they loaded the card on an old desktop that still made fan noises like a small plane. The first clips were ordinary. Wind, mist, a squirrel doing squirrel errands. At 21:58, a figure crossed the lower camera's field fast enough to blur. The shape was upright but hunched forward, head low, arms long. It passed so close the lens caught the texture of skin. A roughness not of hair but of something rubbed with ash and dirt until it held color. At 22:13, another figure paused at the edge of frame. Quarter-turned like a person tolerating a photograph. The head was matted with dark tangles. The face was in shadow except for the eyes, flat, unreflective, like glass with paint behind it. The mouth opened slightly. It might have been breathing. It might have been smiling. Shay tapped the monitor once, a habit like knocking on wood. "We send this up," she said. "Chain of custody. Then we go back for the bells and the second camera and we're done." Caleb nodded, though his neck felt stiff with the decision not to agree. He tried to sleep that afternoon and failed because sleep is a place you go when you believe ceilings are safe. At 18:40, he called his sister, said nothing about any of it, and asked about his niece's spelling test. He listened to a story about a dog that wasn't his, and for 4 minutes the forest receded like tide. He hung up and drove back to the gate. He told himself he was returning for the second camera and the bells. He did not say out loud that he needed to know if the voices learned fast, or if they only knew how to borrow. The sky was the blank gray that means the day has chosen to end early. He reached the shelf at 19:03 without turning on his lamp. Feet remembering roots and rocks his eyes couldn't see yet. The bells were gone. In their places, on 3 separate saplings at different heights, hung 3 twig figures, new lashings, bark faces with the eye holes burned darker than before. Each had hair. 1 tuft was gray. The second was auburn. The third was dark brown woven with something lighter, like the color a child gets in summer. Caleb swallowed air that tasted of penny metal. He photographed each from 3 angles, bagged them in order, and only then realized the second camera was also missing. The tree still held the strap. The housing was gone. He should have left. Instead, he clicked his lamp and followed the facet of fog that looked like a path. It took him downstream, then across, then up, a zigzag that felt intentional. He told himself he was looking for the camera. He was following a line he hadn't set. At 19:41, he reached a smaller clearing he hadn't seen on either day, 10 feet across, ringed with laurel that grew like a fence line. The ground looked freshly combed by hands. In the center lay a shallow basin of red clay, wet and darker, the shape of a bowl carved by palms. The footprint edges around it blurred into one another as if many had stood to watch the same thing. A sound like weeping leaked up from the basin. Not loud, not theatrical. It was the sound people make in hospital hallways when they think no one can hear. He stepped closer because sound asks the brain to move, and the brain, generous fool that it is, often agrees. The weeping's source was not a throat. It was a little pile in the basin's center, 3 objects arranged with care. On the left, a single glove, child-sized, gray knit, damp. On the right, a lens from a pair of glasses cracked like ice. In the center, the missing camera from his high mount, case open, SD card slot empty. The weeping wasn't either of those. It came from beneath the objects, thin and purposeful like air sucked through a reed. He crouched, felt the clay's cold through his knee. He lifted the glove gently. Beneath it, the basin floor held a small hole, a vent 2 fingers wide. The weeping sound threaded up from it steady as a metronome. He stood so fast he swayed. The fog thickened as if encouraged. From the laurel wall came a voice that tried to be his sister's and missed by a syllable. "Caleb," it said, wrong by a hair. "Come on." The laurel to his left said, "Caleb," in Shay's rhythm. The laurel behind him made a child's ver of uncle, the way his niece had said it when she was 3. He closed his eyes and counted to 4. When he opened them, the laurel moved as if something inside adjusted its shoulders. He walked backward, lamp steady, because turning invites a chase even if you don't know what hunts. When he reached the creek, he found the stones had been arranged into a line across the water, a bridge for a person who didn't want to get wet. He believed his ankles could get wet. He broke the line with his boot, stepped through the current, and let the cold anchor him. He didn't run until the firs opened enough to show a strip of sky. He didn't stop until the gate's metal cut across his beam like a blessing. At the office, he filled a report until the paper's boxes ran out, and then he wrote in margins. Bells removed, camera removed, basin with vent. Voices attempted family mimicry. He turned the twig figures over to evidence, signed chain of custody forms with a hand that wouldn't quit its tremor, and sat in the fluorescent wash of a break room while a microwave did to coffee what the fog had done to the woods. Shay came in at 22:11, hair damp, eyes set. "You went back alone," she said, not a question. "I had to see if they learned." "They don't learn," she said. "They practice." The next week, administration issued a statement. Unauthorized camping indicators recovered and removed. No credible threat to public safety identified. Sections temporarily closed for erosion assessment. Internally, an email circulated advising staff to avoid solo night operations in low-lying drainages due to communication unreliability. Nowhere did the words crying, mimicry, or footprints appear. 2 months later, a family hiking near Big Beach Run reported hearing a woman sobbing in the fog. The husband walked toward the sound while his wife stayed on the trail with their son. He returned 5 minutes later with a different gait and didn't speak for the rest of the day. The boy told a volunteer at the visitor center that his dad smelled like dirt from inside the ground. The incident report lives in a folder labeled Visitor Contacts. Miska Caleb finished the contract and turned down the next one without saying why. He took a GIS desk job in Charleston, learned the relief that comes from maps that do not breathe. Some nights he wakes to the sound of weeping threaded under the hum of his refrigerator and spends 20 minutes convincing himself it's plumbing. He keeps the plaster cast of the print wrapped in a towel in a closet he doesn't open much. He has, folded in a file, a small gray glove he bought from a dollar store, not the one he found, but near enough in texture that his hand remembers without consent. He has a sister who asks him twice a month if he wants to come out to the park with the kids on Saturday. He tells her he's busy, and sometimes he is. Every now and then, he opens a copy of the low camera clip and stops it at 22:13, when the figure looks almost into the lens. In the reflection in the eye, dark, flat, almost mirrored, he can see the light source, a headlamp beam, small and perfectly circular. In the rim of that circle, if he leans, he can see a second, fainter circle, as if something just behind the lens wore a lamp and watched the watcher watch. He closes the laptop and sets a glass over the SD card like a cup over a spider, as if the plastic could stop anything that wants to move from moving. He doesn't go back to Cranberry. When anyone asks about the old assignment, he says the access roads wash out too easily and the laurel grows too close. If pressed, he says the fog has a way of making sound into a mouth, and he's not interested in teaching it new words. On the last page of his field notebook, the waterproof one that took his handwriting without complaint, there's a line he wrote in block letters with a pencil dulled by use. Fog is not weather, it is a habit. Ethan Marsh had spent 7 years photographing wildlife across the Great Smoky Mountains, long enough to know how quickly a camera could turn honesty into myth. He specialized in black bear behavior, the quiet work of documenting animals that did not want to be documented. In late June 2023, the Park Service granted him a temporary backcountry permit for a 4-day solo expedition near the chimney tops, ridge and off-trail sector few people visited since the fire scars of 2016. His plan was routine: track bear foraging patterns around recovering vegetation. The permit officer handed him the form and, almost as an afterthought, told him to keep radio check-ins strict. "Fog bounces weird in that bowl," she said. Ethan entered the woods the following morning. By noon, the air thickened with that particular heat Appalachia makes, humid enough to soundproof distance. The path dissolved to a deer track, then to nothing. He set camp beside a stream whose bank was tattooed with bear prints. He hung his food line properly, zipped the tent, and logged coordinates on his Garmin. The first 2 days were textbook. Photographs of claw marks, overturned logs, and a juvenile bear startled into curiosity by the camera shutter. Each night he labeled files, transmitted a check-in, and listened to tree frogs replace traffic. On the third night, June 21st, a pattern began to misbehave. His food bag, which he had hung 15 feet high, was on the ground at dawn, untied, not clawed. The rope's end was cut clean, the fibers sliced, not frayed. Nothing was missing. Yet the knot had been retied lower, a perfect slip hitch he had never used. He photographed the cut, rehung the bag, and told himself some other camper was wandering unannounced. Except there were no other permits issued within 5 miles that week. That evening, while logging bear scat measurements, he heard movement above the ridge. Deliberate steps, uphill, keeping pace with him but never closing distance. Each time he stopped, the steps stopped too. He whistled once, a habit meant to signal humans. The sound was returned perfectly. Same pitch, same duration, delayed by 2 seconds. He told himself echoes could behave strangely in canyons. Yet the ridge was forest, not stone. At 21:34, he zipped inside the tent, turned the lamp low, and tried to read. Through the fabric, he saw intermittent flashes, white then amber, like reflections from glass catching light. Camera glint, he thought, except his own camera was in the tent beside him. He unzipped a sliver and looked out. 30 yards uphill, 3 pale points hovered between trees at shoulder height. Not eyes, too steady, too symmetrical, like small mirrors catching the dying firelight. They blinked out one by one, top to bottom, as if something large had crouched. Ethan drew the zipper slowly, breath in his mouth instead of lungs. He stayed awake until dawn, counting seconds between rustles, the way you count thunder to judge distance. When light returned, the slope was empty. No prints, no torn brush, but the soil near his tripod bore a single indentation. The heel of a bare foot pressed backward, toes gripping as if the person or thing had been descending silently. He logged it, photographed it, and told himself that evidence liked to lie about its origin. Still, he felt watched every time his lens turned skyward. That afternoon, he placed a motion trigger camera facing the ridge and another toward camp, the classic front and back coverage pattern. He checked batteries twice, time-stamped the settings, and wrote a note in his field book. "If I'm wrong, I'll delete this." By sunset, the fog rolled down the peaks in slow threads. His radio hissed open for 1 second, static shaped like breath, and then died. He was officially out of contact. He packed the SD cards in waterproof sleeves and told himself to finish the assignment. Nothing more. The ridge above him remained quiet, but quiet in those mountains is an occupation, not an absence. When darkness finally folded around camp, the first sound came not from the forest but from directly overhead, a low scrape, wood against stone, repeated at intervals like someone dragging a branch across the rocks of chimney tops themselves. Then between scrapes, the click of his camera shutter, soft, mechanical, identical to his own model. He looked at the tent wall and saw the brief, unmistakable pulse of a flash. Someone or something was taking pictures of him. The first flash lasted less than a second, but that was long enough for Ethan's instincts to reorganize his body around fear. His fingers found the camera automatically, muscle memory overriding sense, and in that instinct he did something both foolish and professional. He unzipped the tent just wide enough to take a shot of his own. The photograph was useless at first glance. A burst of overexposed fog, outlines blurred to the texture of smoke. Yet within that fog, 3 points of reflected light hovered in a vertical line, as if the ridge itself had grown vertebrae. Ethan turned off his own flash. He slid the zipper back down until only an inch of night remained. The clicking resumed from above, intermittent, deliberate. The rhythm mimicked the tempo of a DSLR burst mode. 3 quick, 1 pause, 2 quick. Not random, measured. At 23:12, the fog descended lower, thick enough that the world pressed itself against the nylon. He heard faint breathing outside, raspy, uneven, like air drawn through a hollow pipe. Then a shuffle, slow and uncertain, as if whoever stood out there wasn't used to upright walking. He wanted to call out. The training side of his mind, the rational, field-tested voice, told him to announce his presence. Predators, both human and animal, often broke off when faced with a confident noise. But the deeper instinct, the one born before training, told him the opposite. Stay quiet. Let whatever's listening believe you've gone still. The breathing stopped. Silence became a kind of noise, then came a whisper. Not words exactly, but the shape of them. The cadence of someone trying to imitate speech without understanding meaning. Soft consonants repeated, syllables falling apart halfway through. It circled the tent, a mouth-dragging sound around him. When the whispering reached the zipper, the flash came again. White, direct, inside the tent this time. He threw up a hand and saw the after-image burned into his eyelids. A pale oval framed by dark hair. The eyes black and flat as coins. The next thing he heard was the click of a camera shutter from within an arm's length, followed by a noise that didn't belong to any human throat. A high, involuntary giggle, short and wet, like something learning to laugh. Ethan reacted by reflex. He ripped open the tent door, grabbed the flare gun from his pack, and fired straight into the canopy. The red phosphor burst through fog and painted the ridge in color that didn't belong there. For a heartbeat, the entire slope glowed, and in that glow he saw movement. 4 figures, no, maybe 5, stood at the tree line, half turned toward the light. They were thin, naked except for scraps of fabric, and covered in streaks of ash. Their heads jerked as if the light hurt, but also fascinated. One raised its arm to block the flare. Another simply stared, unmoving. They weren't crouched animals. They were human-shaped, but not human-behaved. When the flare died, the night swallowed them. The forest went silent again, a silence so thick it made his ears ring. He spent the rest of the night sitting upright with the camera in his lap, lens pointed toward the zipper, finger on the shutter release. At dawn, the ridge looked almost kind. Mist curled around the trunks in ribbons. The tent flap bore faint fingerprints, long, narrow, oily, as if someone had pressed their face and hands against it during the night. The ground was worse. Barefoot impressions leading in and out of camp. Some small, some adult-sized, the toes widespread and gripping, not flat. Ethan packed everything, double-bagged the cards, and hiked out faster than any bear ever chased him. By late afternoon, he reached the ranger station at Sugarland's Visitor Center. The ranger on duty, a woman named Dunn, listened to his report with professional politeness. "Probably squatters," she said. "We've had incidents. Folks living rough in the backcountry, off-grid types. Sometimes they'll steal food or gear." "The photos?" Ethan handed her the SD card. She inserted it into her reader, and for several seconds neither of them spoke. The first few images were normal: trees, bear scat, self-portraits for scale. Then came the nighttime shots. Frame 1, a burst of fog. Frame 2, a silhouette at the edge of light, head too low, limbs too long. Frame 3, the pale oval, half face, black eyes. Ranger Dunn exhaled slowly, then reached for her radio. "Hold on," she said, tone shifting. "Let's get wildlife on this too." They reviewed every frame, marking timestamps. The later images, between 03:10 and 03:18, showed something new. The outline of Ethan's tent captured from a low angle, as if someone had crawled close and photographed him while he slept. In one frame, his own camera tripod appeared in the corner of the shot, proof the photos weren't taken by him. Ethan sat in silence, pulse still racing. "Someone had my model." "Same camera," Dunn nodded. "You're sure it wasn't a reflection?" He pointed to the metadata on the screen. "Different serial number. Look, EOS 5D Mark IV, but the firmware's older. It's reading 2.0.3, mine's 2.1.0. Her brow furrowed. "So, they had a camera from 2018, give or take, and they knew how to use it." Ranger Dunn called her supervisor. Within an hour, 2 more staff arrived, reviewed the files, and sealed the card in an evidence envelope. The official language started forming around the edges. Phrases like potential human presence, trespass verification, no confirmed threat. They advised Ethan to stay at the ranger housing overnight while they checked the site. He agreed, mostly because exhaustion had replaced defiance. At 19 bars, one of the rangers, an older man named Carver, returned from the field. He looked pale, almost offended by what he'd seen. "We found prints all over the ridge," he said quietly. "Some look recent, others weathered. Couldn't tell you how many, but they're not all adults. Some are tiny, like kids running barefoot on rocks." He paused, glanced at Ethan. "We also found something else. A pile of cameras. 12 of them. All different models, some ancient, some newer. And bones, small animal bones, arranged like a circle around the pile." "Human?" Dunn asked. "Deer, raccoon, maybe dog. But the cameras?" "The shutters are jammed open, like they've been firing until the batteries died." Ethan said nothing. He knew his own camera had the same fault now. Its shutter button still stiff from overuse, as if it had been pressed all night by hands that didn't understand how to stop. Ranger Dunn closed the folder. "We'll file it as a criminal vandalism case until we get more data." But the data never made sense. The memory card from one of the recovered cameras contained footage from angles no one could explain. Shots from above the trees, from directly over the tent as if the photographer had been perched 15 or 20 feet high. The final frame, timestamped 0347, showed Ethan himself crouched inside his tent, headlamp on, camera in lap, exactly as he remembered. But behind him, visible through the translucent nylon, stood a dark outline leaning close to the fabric, mouth open as if whispering into his ear. No report mentioned that last detail. Ethan didn't sleep that night in ranger housing. The light stayed on until morning, and even then he couldn't convince himself the dark had left the corners. He stared at the cracked ceiling paint, listening to the tick of the wall clock, each second marking proof that time still worked here, unlike in the fog. At dawn, he walked to the station office. The evidence room door stood ajar. The bagged cameras and SD cards were gone. In their place, a handwritten note pinned to the corkboard, "Transferred to Knoxville Field Office for review." No signature, no date. Ranger Dunn hadn't signed off on the transfer either. She swore the chain of custody hadn't been authorized. "Sometimes federal agencies get wind of something odd and they jump the line," Carver said later, lighting a cigarette outside. "Military tech, surveillance prototypes, that kind of thing. Easier to pretend it's classified than admit we don't understand it." Ethan didn't argue. He just wanted to go home. But when he turned his phone back on, a new file appeared in his gallery, time-stamped during the blackout hours he'd spent inside the tent. It was a single still image, his own sleeping bag empty and flattened as if he'd never been inside it. The metadata said it was taken with his camera at 0346, the same minute the last image from the recovered cards was captured. He deleted it immediately. Then, out of fear or superstition, he emptied the trash folder twice. Still, the phone's screen carried a faint afterimage every time he opened the gallery. A ghost frame burned into the display. For 3 weeks, Ethan tried to forget. He delivered his bear photographs to the conservation magazine that had commissioned them. They praised the realism, the mist, the unearthly quiet of the compositions. He didn't tell them half of those frames were taken on the same ridge where other cameras had been found stacked like bones. By July, small anomalies started to follow him. Photographs he hadn't taken appeared in his backup drive. Overexposed shots of forests at night, angles from just behind his shoulder. In one, he could see the back of his own head illuminated by his laptop screen, an image impossible to capture alone. He replaced the hard drive, wiped his SD cards, and started using disposable film instead. But every morning, his mailbox contained one printed photo, unlabeled, glossy, professional paper. Each showed the same thing, the ridgeline above chimney tops shot from a higher elevation than any drone could legally fly. The line of trees always the same, but the shadows underneath grew longer with each delivery, creeping closer toward the center frame like advancing figures. He stopped checking the mail after the 7th envelope. Ranger Dunn called once more in August. She said the Knoxville office had no record of the transfer and asked if he'd heard anything. "They're treating it as equipment misplacement now," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, the kind of tremor that means a person doesn't believe their own words. Later that month, Dunn went missing during a solo patrol north of Alum Cave Trail. Her truck was found at the turnout, radio mic hanging from the dash, battery dead. Search teams scoured 6 miles of terrain but found nothing except her field camera lying face down near the stream bed. Lens shattered, memory card missing. The case file was sealed within 2 days. The report listed it as probable fall from ridge, body unrecovered. Ethan knew that ridge. There was no place to fall that wouldn't leave something behind. By autumn, he sold most of his gear and moved to Asheville, taking work photographing art exhibits, safe, still subjects under electric light. He refused wilderness contracts, telling clients he'd developed vertigo. Nights were quieter until one morning in late October, when he woke to the sound of his shutter clicking. The camera sat on his desk, powered off, lens cap in place. Yet the shutter kept firing soft mechanical bursts. He yanked the battery and still it clicked twice more before dying. He left it in a storage locker that same afternoon. 2 days later, the facility manager called to ask if he wanted to pick up the extra box that had been found next to his unit. "It's yours, right?" the man said. Same name on the tape. Just says June 2023 footage. Ethan didn't retrieve it. The locker fee expired 6 months later, and when the company auctioned unclaimed items, that box disappeared into someone else's hands. A year after the incident, a local hiker posted a thread on a photography forum. Found a sealed box of old SD cards at a yard sale. Some kind of wildlife photographer stuff. Most are corrupted, but a few open. Shows tents, people sleeping. One has a timestamp from 2023. Looks like the Smokies near chimney tops. Creepiest thing, I swear the last image shows whoever's in the tent taking the photo at the same time. Like two cameras pointed at each other, both firing. The thread vanished within hours. Ethan doesn't go online anymore. He keeps one print above his bed, a normal one. Sunrise over an empty ridge. But sometimes when the room is dark and the first streetlight hits the glass, a reflection appears faintly in the corner of the photo. Two pale shapes standing on the ridge, shoulder to shoulder, staring down toward where he took the shot. He tells himself it's just the angle, just light and glass and coincidence. But he never sleeps directly beneath it, because now he knows something about the Smoky Mountains that no press release will ever print. The watchers don't live in the forest. They use it. They borrow its fog, its quiet, its patience, just long enough to learn how to see you back. And when they've learned you well enough, they start to take pictures too. I've worked search and rescue for Smith and Grayson counties long enough to know the difference between a lost person and a vanished one. Lost people leave you a breadcrumb, a bad choice in footwear, a missed blaze, a panic sprint that paints the ground with broken fern. Vanished people leave only the feeling that the woods have a second mouth you can't see. We got the call on April 12, 2024. 3 college kids from Virginia Tech had set camp off the Appalachian Trail not far from Dickey. Gap. 1, male, 21, stepped out to use the stream around 23:30 and didn't come back. His friends waited 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour before they broke and went looking. They heard him calling for help from upslope and chased his voice through Laurel until it started coming from downslope behind them. They doubled back. The voice kept moving. By 02:10, they'd barricaded themselves in the nearby shelter with a section hiker couple who had a satellite beacon. The beacon pinged us, and at 04:50 we had a helo warming on the pad and 2 ground teams mustering at the trailhead parking lot. I took Team 2, 4 of us with radios, medkits, and the kind of coffee that tastes like melted batteries. The 2 friends, Emma and Lucas, were shock pale and talking in overcorrections. They'd done a lot right, stayed near the shelter, sent coordinates, marked trees with torn bandana strips. What they couldn't stop saying over and over was that the voice sounded like their friend, until it didn't. That it would say the right words, "Guys, I need help," but in a cadence that wasn't his, as if the words were a recording the forest had learned to mouth. We started from the stream where Derek, missing, had last been heard. The bank mud kept good prints for 18, maybe 20 feet. His boots, size 10, and then a confusion of barefoot impressions all around, toes splayed wide like a hand pressed flat. The boot prints ended clean. No slip, no drag. Just stopped. I've seen that twice before. It never sits right in your head. We fanned out in a slow box pattern. 2 pushers, 2 listeners. I took the right flank with Morales. The fog was a low spill over the creek. Not bad yet, but you could feel how it wanted to climb. We called Derek's name in measured intervals. The mountain gave us our voices back out of order, delayed like it was flipping through a deck. At 05:37, just as the sky began to gray, we heard him. "Over here." 20 degrees right of our line, closer than it should have been based on volume, as if the sound took a shortcut. We stopped. Morales raised a hand. We listened hard. "Here, man," the voice said again. And if I'd had to swear under oath, I'd have said it was Derek. I started to angle toward it when the same voice called from behind my left shoulder. "Over here." Same pitch, same breath at the end of the "here," like a person running. It came again from straight ahead. Then from the right. 3 points. No echo does that. Echoes are dumb. This was distribution. We held position. 20 beats 30, we didn't answer. The voice stopped as cleanly as a track cut with a knife. The fog thickened fast after that. I radioed Team 1 to collapse toward the shelter and establish a hard base. We moved with compass bearings instead of sight lines. Footing went spongy. The woods ran out of depth. Every tree stood at the same distance and every sound wore the same coat. At 6:12, we found a pit. 4 feet deep, 5 across, lined with hide, deer maybe or goat, and scattered bone, small animal mostly. In the far side of the pit sat a twig figure bound with sinew. It had a face of bark with 2 burned-out eyes and hair knotted through the lashing, 2 colors, dark and blonde. I bagged it, tagged the GPS, and called it in. Team 1 reported a fresh problem. Emma and Lucas had heard laughing on the ridge above the shelter. Not loud, more like someone practicing the shape of laughter. The kind you'd hear if you told a child, "Now laugh," and they didn't know how yet. Rocks had smacked the shelter roof twice. No injuries. The section hiker couple stood ready with bear spray and a hiking pole like a spear. At 06:40, the fog loosened and the trees regained their edges. We swept the grid again. 50 yards downslope near an old fire scar, we found Derek, alive, hypothermic. He was crouched under a laurel with his head tucked like a bird hiding its beak. No blood, shirt torn at the collar. He flinched hard when we touched him, then let go all at once like a kid who's been braced too long. He said, "I ran," and then they kept saying my name wrong. We practiced calm, blanket, warm packs, fluids. He answered to his name, recognized Lucas and Emma on scene, but his eyes slid long over the tree line like the forest had left a magnet in his skull. We evac'd him by litter to the helipad cut. The pilot took one look at the fog creeping back and said we had 20 minutes or we didn't have a bird. We made 20. Back at ground, a deputy asked me sotto voce if I'd ever heard voices throw themselves around like that. I told him I'd heard coyotes do tricks with ridges that would make you swear a choir moved in. But this wasn't coyotes. Coyotes don't say names. He nodded like he had to file the thought somewhere he didn't like. The official line we wrote that afternoon was clean. Missing hiker located. Hypothermia treated. Evidence of unauthorized camping, pit structure removed per safety protocols. No ongoing threat identified, but that night, when I put my boots by the door and sat with the ache in my thighs that means you did your job, I could still hear it. The way my own name would sound if a stranger wore it like a shirt 2 sizes off. The way a thing might test your edges to see where you end. I set my phone on the table. It buzzed once. A voicemail left at 03:02 during the search. The timestamp made no sense. We'd had no bars. I played it twice before I understood what I was hearing. My own voice, low, strained, saying, "Over here," followed by the rustle of leaves and the tin rattle of a bell on a zipper I don't own. I didn't save it. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there like a dull tooth you know you'll have to deal with when it starts to rot. At roll call the next morning, admin asked us for containment language if hikers asked questions. We practiced fog, acoustics, coyotes, panic. We didn't practice the part where the woods speak back. I didn't sleep that night. Too much quiet. At 02:11, the same voicemail arrived again. We went back 2 nights later. Not because policy asked us to, but because field sense did. When voices learn you, they sometimes keep what they practiced. Team configuration was lean. Me, Morales, a young biologist named Shu, on loan from Wildlife Resources, and a veteran backcountry ranger, Hart, who had that particular calm people get when they've burned through fear and found routine underneath it. We carried bells on fishing swivels like we were setting catfish rigs. Thin lines we could string at knee height around the shelter to make the night tell on itself. The section hiker couple had moved on. Emma and Lucas were back at school, their counselor's number on my phone. We set the bells in a rough oval 20 yards from the shelter and placed 2 trail cameras, one low, one high. Shu chalked powder in a scatter pattern near the stream to show disturbances. Hart checked the shelter's roof and found 4 round stones resting along the ridge cap, not fallen but set. By 1840, fog started building in bowls. It crawled down from the saddle and pooled around the laurel stands, leaving the ridges visible like islands. We took the shelter instead of tents. 3 walls, elevated platform, better lines. Radios checked clean at the top of the hour, then degraded into hash within 15 minutes like someone crushed them in hand. At 21:06, a bell chimed once to the east. A second chimed immediately to the west. Then both stopped as if fingers pinched the tongues. Hart muttered, "They're walking the line." We kept lamps low and pushed the cameras to night mode. No one called out. The woods don't need the invitation. At 21:37, the crying started. It was the same three-note drop we'd heard in the first search, grief thin, almost private. It came from behind the shelter where the ground steepened into a pebbled runoff. Sue wrote "female" in his notebook, then crossed it out. The sound failed gender. It was grief doing shape work through a throat that had used the wrong muscles too long. The second voice joined at 21:44, the relay. It repeated the first poorly, off by a heel half-beat, then a third, closer, wronger. It used my name and got it right then wrong, as if probability would carry it over the finish line. Hart put a finger to his lips. We practiced stillness. The crying stopped. The whispering started open. A soft command, handed hand to hand around the shelter's open face where our packs made a low barricade. The whispers spaced themselves as if counting us, then doubled up, faster, a chorus convincing itself it had numbers. At 22:12, small stones tapped the shelter roof in slow succession. 4 hits, pause, 3 hits, pause, 4 again. Not random. A knock sequence. Hart breathed out through his nose, the closest he gets to profanity on duty. We kept our discipline until 22:40, when the first hand appeared, a pale shape sliding over the edge of the shelter's platform, fingernails thick and yellowed. Not claw sharp, but layered like someone had eaten bad keratin for years. The palm pressed flat and wide, connective tissue spread like a star. It withdrew when the beam touched it. The hand returned 10 inches left a heartbeat later, testing for angle and light. Negative contact, I said softly. A thing to say to prove you were still a person with a voice. Morales didn't answer. He was listening too hard to the dirt under us. The bell stayed silent, which meant one of two things. Either nothing moved within the ring, or whoever moved knew bells and stepped wide. The latter felt more likely when we saw the twine at 22:53. It had been draped across 2 of the lines, pulling them tight so they couldn't chime. Someone had strung them silent. The whispering came back in new words. Hungry, it said. Cold. The syllables fell in a way that felt like copying. They tried hurt and made it into 2 breaths. Who? Art. Then they said please, and the S turned into a wet hiss. It would have been less wrong if it weren't so close. Hart slid a flare toward the edge. On my count, he said. 3, 2, 1. The flare popped and rolled into the fog. The world colored itself wrong again, red film over leaf and bark. And in that light, the line of the ridge above the shelter wrote its own truth. 7 shapes, upright, spaced like fence posts, all facing us. The flare hissed and died. The ridge went blank. For a minute, nothing happened. Then from the left came the sound of a zipper, not ours. A tent zipper opening slow, teeth by teeth. Then another zipper somewhere to the right in reply. They did it twice, like a joke between them. That's enough, Shu whispered. His voice didn't hold. He'd wanted this to be an animal behavior problem. It wasn't behaving. At 23:18, the crying shifted. A child's voice this time, jagged at the edges like it had been dragged across gravel before it learned how to sit still. It said uncle the way small kids with 3 teeth say it. I had to swallow twice before I could place the sound in my mind as a memory and not an order. Hart put a hand on my shoulder. He didn't take it off for a long minute. I told myself there were only 2 ways out of the night. We held or we broke and gave the forest more to learn. We held, we counted breaths. We watched the dark breathe back. At 03:06, a bell finally rang naked and honest, a little ting in the east. We trained our lights and saw nothing but fog and the vague sense of a leg where fog was thicker. It moved without a sound you could put on a report. At 04:41, the fog began to thin, not because dawn asked it to, but because the act was over. The whispers retreated to the line of laurel, then folded into silence. We waited for sky pigment. We gave it 15 more. At first light, we found the line. Our fishing bells hung where we'd left them, but the twine that had bound 2 was braided with hair. 2 colors again, dark and blonde, a clean weave the length of a child's forearm. The shelter roof held 5 stones now. The pattern changed. Sue checked the powder field near the stream. Small bare prints had crossed it in a neat row, each stepping in the place the last had stepped as if feet measured feet. There were no boot prints with them. The low camera's card gave us 3 frames worth printing. The first, a smear of fog and a pale chin at the extreme edge, too close to focus. The second, the shelter face, our packs braced, 4 dark shapes at the ridge above like tree stumps with heads. The third, the underside of the shelter platform as if the photographer had crawled underneath and shot upward at our boots. One boot wasn't mine or Morales's. It was child-sized and old, patched leather laces like something pulled from a barn. No foot in it, just the boot. We bagged everything. We walked out in a line 10 paces between because distance lets a man become a shape less easy to copy. At the parking lot, a man in a county polo I'd never seen before waited by my truck. He had the language ready. "We appreciate your thoroughness," he said. "Let's standardize the phrasing. Wildlife interference, acoustic phenomena, unauthorized camping artifact removal. Voices," I said. "Acoustic phenomena," he repeated. Lobster quiet. I signed the chain of custody log for the cards and the braid and the twine. The pen left too much ink. The letters bled. When I handed it back, the man used a tissue to hold the pen like it was evidence, and I realized maybe it was. We're trained not to take this personally. The woods aren't personal either. That night at home, the third voicemail arrived at 0211. My voice saying my name wrong. I didn't play it. I knew where the teeth would be. The county press release landed 2 days later. It said the thing it always says, the way a form knows its own shape. Search and rescue successful. No ongoing threat. Fog and terrain complicating factors. It mentioned wildlife activity once and acoustic carry 3 times. It thanked volunteers and directed hikers to stay on marked sections of the Appalachian Trail. It did not say mimicry. It did not say pit. It did not say the hair braided into twine like a bracelet you give a friend, so they remember the same days you do. Derek's discharge summary hit my inbox under the lamplight. Hypothermia resolved. Soft tissue abrasions, lower extremities. Psychological consult recommended. He hadn't told the hospital anything useful. During a follow-up call, he said a sentence that pinballed around my head for a week. They didn't make mistakes until I did. I asked him what that meant. He said he tripped, went quiet to listen, and then the voice that had been his stopped being a recording and started being him. They figured out the breath, he said. Once I got scared enough, we were on the same rhythm. I told him to rest. I didn't tell him to stop sleeping with earplugs. People should keep their lives where they can reach them. A week passed. Hikers came and went. We pulled a drunk off a switchback and a kid with a sprained ankle from a creek. Normal tasks that make a man feel the world is fixable if you sweep hard and push right. Then the shelter went. The Park Service cited structural concerns, said the beams had rot and the floor needed replacing, closed it with fresh plywood and a locked chain through the posts. When I asked a ranger buddy if that was the reason, he shrugged without moving his shoulders. "Best reason we've got," he said. The braid went to the lab. The report came back thin, human hair. 2 donors, 1 likely juvenile. No root bulbs present for DNA. The twine fiber was inner bark from something local, basswood maybe, worked by hand. The doll we'd pulled from the pit was cataloged as ritualized artifact, the same phrase I've seen used on illegal shrines and teenage witchcraft. The category makes the thing sound like a hobby. It wasn't. At 03:02 on a Tuesday, the voicemail returned. I listened because not listening had turned into another kind of listening. My voice, over here. Then another me, over here. A third, over here. A fourth that wasn't me at all. Using my cadence and missing 3 degrees of warmth. I pressed 9 to save and heard the automated voice mark it as saved. The number felt like signing a contract. 2 days later, my phone chimed while I sat in the unit finishing the last of watch coffee. A text from an unknown number. "You're using the wrong words. No previous thread." Area code local. I waited for a follow-up that didn't come. I didn't answer. I noted the number on paper, and the paper made me feel as if I had done something. Sue dropped by the station with a thumb drive and the carefully neutral smile of a man who knows he's about to do something he isn't supposed to. "I cloned the cards before evidence," he said. "You didn't get them from me. We watched in the report room under fluorescent lights that make everything look already dead." The best clip was the ridge at 2212, the flare moment. The 7 figures stood with their heads angled like people seeing a sunrise for the first time. The resolution wasn't good enough to give us faces, and I am grateful for every pixel that failed. But when we slowed it frame by frame, a detail slid sideways into focus. The second from the left had a necklace. Not metal, hair. A much longer braid than the one we recovered, looped twice around the neck like a lanyard. It swung when the figure turned its head, and whatever bobbit reflex the human brain keeps for strangulation fired hard in mine. We could have sent that frame up. We didn't. Not because of orders, but because we understood what would happen. The picture would be explained into something else. The truth dies from explanations the way lungs die from smoke. I started sleeping in the front room where the street folds at my window. Human noise helps. One night, the fog came cheap and low, the kind that turns a neighborhood into an outline. At 02:11, the sound outside was a zipper pulled slow. I knew it was a car cover or a neighbor's shed or any of 100 things that belong to towns. I knew it. Then a child's voice said "uncle" in a tone I recognized from nowhere and everywhere at once. I didn't get up. I didn't look. The sound hasn't repeated, yet. In June, the district rerouted that section of trail by 2 miles. The new path climbs over a bald with views tourists can hashtag. It's safer than the hollow and truer for the press releases. The old stretch is posted with bright signs. Temporary closure, maintenance. The sheet metal wobbles when wind catches it. Hikers take photos of the signs and tag them with bear emojis. It's fine. It's a language we can all speak without bleeding. Every few weeks, a report lands quiet as a leaf. Voices heard, laughing in fog, rocks on roof. Most wrap themselves in coyotes and acoustics by the second paragraph. I file them. I drink what the machine calls coffee. I check that the bells we took down are still in a bag and not on a line where the night can count them. If you want a true ending, you don't get one. You get this. Emma emailed me a month after the rescue. She said she couldn't hike anymore without hearing her own voice ask her to leave the trail. She said when she tries to sleep, she feels breath on the fabric of the tent she isn't in. She asked if this was normal. I wrote back, yes, because sometimes the right lie is a fence that keeps people from falling into holes there's no rope for. 3 days later, at 03:02, the voicemail came again. Not my voice this time, a woman's. It said, "Help me," 3 times, and the 3rd time got the vowels. Wrong in a way that told me the lesson was ongoing. Saved it. Then I went to the closet and found an old tin of fishing, bells from when my father taught me to listen for trout at the edge of dusk. I strung one by a thread and hung it on the inside of my bedroom doorknob. It chimed once when the furnace kicked on. It chimed again when a truck passed. It hasn't chimed at 03:02. Not yet. When people ask me now what to do in the fog around Dickey Gap, I give them the printed advice: stay on the trail, keep a whistle, don't hike alone, tell someone where you're going. Then I add 2 things not on paper. If the woods call you by name, count to 4 before you answer. And if you hear yourself tell you where to go, stay where you are. I'm a field geologist with Kentucky's Division of Abandoned Mine Lands. My work is usually math in muddy boots, identify voids, map subsidence risk, sign off on grouting plans. No one will thank you for until a church parking lot stops sinking. Pine Hollow, an east-facing cut on the flank of Pine Mountain, came to me in September of 2024 with a simple problem. 2 cabin foundations on state land had tilted 4 inches in as many months, and a logging road had developed a sag you could see from the highway. My job was to tell the county whether an old drift mine or a karst pocket was to blame. The county clerk handed me a water-warped plat and said, "Old Whitaker Place is in there somewhere. Folks say kids used to play in the root cellar." She said it like people say a thing when they don't want to own it. I hiked in on foot the next morning. Air clear, 64 degrees. Ground still holding last night's rain. The logging road had indeed sunk. An elongated oval 18 feet long, 3 feet deep at center. Edges scalloped like something had chewed the dirt from below in careful bites. I paced off a rough grid, drove rebar pins, and ran a quick shallow resistivity line. The numbers were wrong in a way that tells you your instrument isn't lying. You are. A high void signature started at the road, ran beneath the first collapsed foundation, and continued into the hill like a pulse. The cabin was exactly what Pine Hollow had promised. A chimney shoulder still standing, hand-hewn logs slumped under decades of weather, porch posts leaning like tired men. But behind the ruin, cut into the slope under a shelf of root-tangled soil, a door sat where no cellar door should be. It wasn't original to the cabin. Newer wood, crude hinges, a padlock that had been cut, not rusted through. The cut was clean. A hacksaw or bolt cutters. I told myself to mark it and keep to protocol. Instead, I knelt and listened. Palm on the wood the way you check a door for heat in a fire. Air moved past my skin, not wind. The steady draft you get when a large underground space breathes through small openings. Negative pressure. The hill exhaled. I should have called it in. I took a photograph, texted my supervisor coordinates, and wrote, "Unsafe opening, cover WA's ply plus T-posts." Then I lifted the door. The smell met me first. Damp earth. Mineral cool ammonia notes like a barn left closed too long. 3 rough-cut steps led down to a landing, then a slanted tunnel, hand-carved in clay and stone, the walls nicked by blades that were never sharp enough. I clipped my headlamp, put chalk marks on the doorframe, and told myself I'd look 15 feet. No more, just enough to say with confidence what needed closing. The passage dipped, widened, then abruptly opened into a chamber maybe 15 feet across and high enough to stand. The ceiling had been shored in places with scavenged lumber, 2 coiffures, a section of split rail, something that looked like a door laid flat. The floor was tamped dirt softened with layer after layer of fabric and plastic, flattened tents, sleeping bags, a child's fleece blanket with cartoon bears, ground into a single matted sheet. I swept my beam and saw racks against the walls made from saplings lashed with wire. Hanging from them were strips of meat in various stages of drying. I told myself deer. My stomach didn't argue. My head did. Along the far wall, above a shelf of scavenged canned goods and a line of plastic jugs, the dirt had been scraped and marked. Tally marks. 5-stroke bundles stacked in grids, thousands of them. People think tallies are always days. They can be anything a body can count. The wall said counting was important enough to carve away the room to make space for it. I took 4 quick photos, wanting out, and nearly tripped on the crate at my feet. Wallets inside. 3 on top were older, leather gone soft from damp. Beneath them, a driver's license and a snap case, the kind I've seen clipped to hikers' packs. The photo showed a smiling woman in a UVA shirt. The expiration was recent. I put it back. I shouldn't have touched it at all. My radio hissed, a burst of static punched by a single sharp syllable that could have been my name if you were feeling unkind. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. From deeper in the tunnel came a soft shuffle, then stillness. I moved my light toward the sound and found another passage leading off at an angle. Narrower, fresher scraped. On the floor between us, a ring of stones, and at its center, a little figure made from twigs bound with twine. A dolling, palm length, a knot of hair tied tight at its chest like a charm. The hair was 2 colors twisted together, dark and blonde. I know what a symbol looks like even when I don't know which god it's for. I backed away without turning, keeping the beam on the side passage until its darkness swallowed the edge of my light and made it again the nothing it was before me. At the landing, I hesitated and committed one more sin. I raised my phone and took a sweep of the chamber, slow and steady, the way you do when you'll need to show a room to someone who will never see it. For a fraction of a second, the far edge of the light caught motion, something withdrawing behind a rack with a fluid speed that didn't match hunger or fear. Just practice. I made the door again and slid it shut with a care I reserve for glass and graves. Fresh air hit me like a kindness. I put rocks on top of the door without quite knowing why, then walked back to the road where Math waited, patient as always. On the hike out, I called the sheriff. I like the sheriff. He's a quiet man who knows the difference between cow trails and men who'd rather you take the cow trail. I gave him the coordinates and said the words I am paid for. Possible at it. Human occupation, unstable. Need law on scene and a daylight entry team. I'll file. He said he'd send a deputy, and he did. She arrived before I had the truck started, looked at the door, breathed in like a person walking into a chapel, and said, "We'll wait for backup." At home that night, my supervisor emailed a curt, "Do not re-enter. Await AML decision." I replied copy and left the laptop open on the kitchen table. The smell of the tunnels clung to my clothes. I showered and couldn't make myself close my eyes for longer than the time it takes an old house to settle. I wrote my report until the shape of my own handwriting steadied me. I included the numbers that justify men, the void resistivity and approximate span. I did not include the tally marks count estimate because counting felt like joining. And I did not include the hair in the twine because I didn't have a category for it on the form. At 1:13 a.m., my phone buzzed on the table. No indecent calls then. A voicemail with no number, no message header, just a file. I pressed play and heard my own boots on tamped earth, then my breath, then the gentle tapping of stone on stone. I'd turned my radio off before I went down. The tunnel had not. I didn't sleep. Morning makes cowards feel like men again. I carried that into the next day like a talisman that could break weather. We would go back with deputies and tape and evidence bags and stronger lamps. We would put the underground in the correct folder. That is the lie we tell in my work, and it often holds. It didn't there. We went back 48 hours later with more lights than sense. 2 deputies, Morrison and Alvarez, plus a wildlife resources officer named Brooke who'd seen her share of outlaw deer camps cut deep into hollers. I wore a P100 half mask because my field kit contains optimism in the shape of filters. We taped the door perimeter, logged entry time, photographed the cut padlock, and stepped into air that belonged to stone. We moved the first chamber slow, keeping feet high to avoid sinking into fabric. Brooke swept with a thermal and grunted. Nothing but ghost heat in the racks, a distribution pattern like bodies had been there and gone. Morrison tagged the crate of wallets and did what deputies do when they want truth to make a proper line. He counted. 11. He stopped aloud at 11. He stopped aloud, but his eyes kept adding. The left-hand passage led where I expected, deeper, quartering along a bedding plane into a side room. The right-hand passage cut cleaner, almost true, like someone had learned to follow the ridge in their mind and dug an answer without surveying. We took the right. I chalked arrows, numbered them, because my trade is leaving breadcrumbs back to a door. The second chamber was larger by half, roof higher, the shoring more deliberate. Here the racks held not meat but clothes, folded stacks of shirts, pants sorted by size on sticks through the belt loops, shoes lined heel to toe along the wall, pairs and singles, new and rotted to lace. Clothes have a smell when they belong to basements. These smelled like open air and smoke and skin. A child's raincoat hung from a nail at my shoulder, yellow with little frogs printed along the hem. Alvarez bagged the raincoat, his mouth a tight line like a man touching a snake he mustn't kill. Brooke took out her phone and photographed the tally marks, then swore under her breath. You see how they're grouped, not days? That's base 5, base 10, base... I don't know. It's not calendar, the sound came then. Not ahead, not behind. From overhead, I looked up fast enough to spark headlamp flare. Dirt sifted down in a lazy line from a seam near the ceiling where someone, something, had pushed a small plug aside to look through, then replaced it. The seam sat 3 feet wide and 6 feet above Brooke's head. The plug moved again. A single long breath, we froze. Deputies do that differently than civilians. Criminals teach stillness to law. Morrison moved first, slow and without theater, a step backward to give space to the ceiling that now might be a floor. The breath stopped. The plug slid back into place. Gravity covered the observation with a thin pat of dust like breading. We pretended we believed it. Third chamber, I said, because the way you live sometimes is by saying a thing that becomes true if other people want it to. It narrowed before it widened. A squeeze that told you didn't have to go farther if your body had rights. The chalk on my fingers turned slick with sweat. I wrote arrow numbers without trusting my hand. 12, 13. The counting room opened with no notice, just a weight shift in the floor where the tamp gave way to something harder. The walls in here wore tally marks from floor to standing height, and then up where ladders had been braced, and above tallies, scratches, crude pictograms. A cabin, a ridge, a line of stones. Crude stick figures in rows below ground with marks above their heads like hats or hair. It wasn't art, it was record. On the far wall, someone had dug a shallow niche and set 3 objects the way you set a photograph on a mantle. A driver's license like the one I'd seen in the crate. A small stuffed bear, left eye missing, fur matted. A metal tag with numbers stamped in rows like a dog license. The numbers matched a plate recorded in a missing persons bulletin from last spring, out of Floyd County. I remember numbers. It's a sickness. It keeps me employed. Brooke leaned closer to the pictograms and whispered, "This is a map." The images repeated at intervals and changed in small ways. In the later scratches, the line of stones had moved closer to the cabin. In the latest, the stones had been filled in with cross-hatching, blocked. Next to that representation, someone had carved a rectangle with a crude figure inside it, horizontal and a long line to the surface. Not a coffin, a tunnel. Back out, Morrison said. He's the sort of man who can make air molecules obey without raising his voice. I wanted to obey. Then my lamp hit something that replaced obedience with inventory. On the floor near the niche lay hair braided into a rope the length of my forearm. 2 colors again. The braid had been looped and knotted like a strap, something you could throw over a shoulder to carry weight. The ends were bound with strips shaved from inner bark. Alvarez's radio clicked, hissed, and delivered a single word through someone else's throat. Stop. Not our dispatcher's voice. Not any voice we knew. A thin girl's pitch carried by a man's rhythm. It made my jaw ring. We backed through the squeeze and into the second chamber, turning only when the room demanded it. That's when we saw the line. Our chalk arrows had been smudged, not erased, dragged sideways as if someone with a broad palm and poor patience wanted to understand the direction and then practiced it on the wall until the arrowheads looked less human and more like small birds turned in migration. It was clumsy and eager. Out in the first chamber, the rows of wallets were undisturbed. The rack of meats hung still. A single strip had been lifted free. A bone beneath had been set on a crate lid. This is the part I will never justify to anyone who wasn't there. The bone had been scratched with numbers, notches, 5, then 3. Counting something that doesn't belong to arithmetic. Counting us? At the door, the rocks I'd placed were rearranged, stacked in an alternating ring. Small, large, small. A pattern I'd seen scratched on the wall beneath a stick figure's feet. A trail sign, but older, truer, language built on shape instead of sound. We logged exit at 1322. Alvarez sealed the hair braid and the license in separate bags. Brooke said nothing until we reached the trucks, then said too much, to fill a silence that wasn't done with us. We need state police, she said. We need social services, we need a prosecutor with appetite, Morrison said. He lit a cigarette he'd sworn off and blew smoke toward the ground like he could weigh the air down. By evening, the hollow was different. It had people in it with green vests and radios, and those make the woods pretend they are public for a while. The county prosecutor came, a state police detective came, a woman from social services whose eyes were kinder than her job would let her be. We briefed. We used words that keep rooms together: unauthorized habitation, evidence of theft, child endangerment, potential abduction. The room held. They planned a dawn entry with more bodies and better cameras. They posted a deputy at the logging road and asked me to write a hazard memo, so everyone could say the right things at the hospital after. I went home, showered, lined up the photographs on my kitchen table and tried to understand the counting. If you find the count, sometimes you find the purpose. At 0217, my phone vibrated, a tiny animal waking. A text without a number attached. Bring light, then bring rope, then bring friend. The last word sat wrong in my head until I realized I'd seen it scratched on the wall, under 2 stick figures drawn side by side, sharing a single hair braid line between them. I didn't answer. I watched the ceiling paint and told myself I would not hear anything I did not let in. We went back at dawn. We never made it to the 3rd chamber. The morning team was bigger, 4 deputies, 2 state troopers, Brooke from wildlife, me for maps and hazard calls, and a crew of county guys who know how to move air with portable fans when bad air won't move itself. We ran O2 readings at the door, safe enough, and stacked plywood in case we had to seal the opening for a while. Morrison briefed the radios to a common channel and reminded everyone that tunnels demand single file and humility. We entered on a rhythm, 2 in, 2 covering, then the next pair. My job was 3rd in line with a chalk and a span wheel. Before my boots hit the first landing, the radio crackled with a voice that did not identify itself. It said, "Not here," in a tone you would use to a dog who chose the wrong door. Alvarez squeezed the mic and said, "Unit identify." The tunnel answered with silence that felt amused. 1st chamber, racks, tally walls. 2nd chamber, closed, the yellow raincoat now gone. My chalk marks from the day before had been cleaned neatly, a damp cloth or a sleeve. In their place, on the left-hand wall at knee height, 4 short lines and 1 long, an arrow made in counting instead of geometry, pointing toward the narrow squeeze. We pushed to the counting room and found it changed into the kind of room that writes your report for you. The niche was empty, the stuffed bear gone, the license gone, the hair braid gone. In their place lay two things that do not belong in dirt: a sealed, unopened bottle of pediatric electrolyte drink and a plastic-wrapped loaf of white bread, both new, both from a brand you can buy at any gas station 10 miles down the mountain. Next to them, a clean blue inhaler. Someone had placed them like offerings or inventory. The sound behind us was not a breath this time. It was the bluff, low click of a camera shutter trying to focus in the dark. Brooke spun her light back down the passage. Two faces withdrew in smeared streaks. One adult, one small, both painted with ash, eyes flat, like someone had drawn irises with soot. They hadn't expected the bright. Most people don't who live where you can't waste light. Law enforcement, Alvarez called, voice even. Step forward. Hands where we can see. Nobody gets hurt. In tunnels, promises are currency. You only spend what you can cover. The smaller figure made a sound, not a cry. A two-syllable burst that felt like a word practiced in the wrong mouth. No, go, it said. Then again, no, go, as if repeating language consolidated it. Morrison moved a half step and the sound multiplied from behind the walls. From vents and seams, from a hole near the ceiling I had not noticed. No, go, echoing imperfectly, warmer, colder, until the tunnel itself seemed to say it. It is hard to stand your ground when the ground starts speaking. Back out, Morrison said. Again without heat, and we did. Slow as we'd come. The way you leave a skittish horse. At the first chamber, the air changed. Not the reading, the feeling. The tunnels have moods. You learn them if you admit they do. The rack of meat stirred, though no draft moved, and from the passage we hadn't taken came the smell of bleach so strong it made my eyes water. Someone had poured it recently. Over what, I didn't ask my lungs. We broke daylight and the world felt unnaturally loud. Birds, insect droning, a truck on the highway. The prosecutor, who'd waited topside, spoke into a phone, listened, then ordered, "Hold perimeter. SWAT en route." His face contained the calculus of optics. You cannot raid a hill without explaining the hill later. He wanted his sentences tidy. SWAT didn't find anyone underground. They found the clothes room emptied of anything worth wearing, and the counting room wiped with a wet rag until tally strokes blurred into brown. The niche held only the inhaler. A second entrance, one we hadn't found, had been dug and filled in the night, a fresh plug under Laurel 23 yards upslope. Tracks ran everywhere, barefoot, adult and child, the toes splayed wide. No shoes, no prints to a road. The hill had eaten their path like it always does. And yet, this part is the reason I still carry the file in my bag when I don't need to. 2 people came out alive. Not that day. 4 days later, 2 hollows south. A pair of loggers heard someone tapping from beneath a slab of rock in a blowdown. They pried, shoved, and the ground gave up a narrow shaft that smelled like Pine Hollow. A girl came out first, 11 maybe, hair hacked short, pupils slow to bother with the sun, and behind her a man in his 30s with ribs like severe calligraphy. Neither had ID. Both wore clothes made from other clothes. Both went silent when asked names. The girl had the wristband from a hospital emergency room on her left arm, dated May of the previous year, a county across the state line. The man had a necklace, twisted hair, 2 colors, looped twice. He hid it when the deputy noticed. They said little. The girl said friend twice and put her hand on the man's sleeve each time. When offered food, she lifted the loaf of white bread first, broke it in exact halves, gave him the larger one. He cried without noise. The man said not ours when shown a photo of the yellow raincoat. He said not ours when shown a photo of the stuffed bear. His accent was shallow Appalachian, smoothed by silence and time. He wouldn't say who the braid belonged to, just turned away and covered the hair with his palm like it was a candle someone else had to shield. The county called it a rescue. The state called it an ongoing investigation. The social worker called me and asked about the counting marks. Days, she asked. I don't think so, I said, and when she asked what else, I said maybe the number of times you keep a door closed until you don't. She didn't write that. 3 men were arrested over the next week, caught running a ridge away from a secondary tunnel, mouth with sacks full of canned goods, knives made from lawnmower blades, a bolt cutter. They gave ages that read like guesses. The youngest claimed 19. They had no records, no school, no vaccination scars I could see in the photos. They spoke English that missed articles and sat verbs where they didn't belong, like language adapted to tight passages. They gave one answer to every question about other people. Don't know. A week later, a concrete truck blocked the logging road. and a crew poured a plug into the primary entrance, a gray scar that looked like municipal indifference. Signs went up. Dangerous mine opening, no entry. We use that language because we only have so many signs. And we don't have a people-built-their-own underworld option in the shop. The press release praised interagency cooperation. It said evidence of long-term unauthorized habitation, possible trafficking, 2 individuals recovered. It didn't say that the counting room had been grouted shut with everything it couldn't name still in it. It didn't say that a second map had been found scratched near the secondary plug, lines leading off beyond our grid, toward other hollows, new rectangles, more vents. It didn't say that you cannot bury a network by filling one hole. The girl and the man went into a tangle of services and paperwork that eats people with good intentions. I got one update through a back channel 3 months later. She liked coloring books but didn't like crayons that snapped. He wouldn't sit with his back to a wall because walls were for counting, not rest. I went back once more, alone, on a warm Sunday when bureaucracy doesn't wear a face. I stood at the concrete and listened. Nothing. The hill felt empty in the way a mouth does when a tooth is gone. Then just as I turned to go, a fly crawled from a hairline crack and the hill exhaled, air pushing past my ankles like a sigh. On the way out, I stopped at the old cabin and looked at where porch had been porch. The chimney still held heat no instrument could register, memory heat like stone that had kept watch too long. On the back ledge of what had been the window, someone had stacked a pattern of stones. Small, large, small. A braid of 2 colors of hair lay draped across the middle stone, fresh enough that light still caught in it. I did not touch it. I did not bag it. I did not bring law. I left it for whoever needed that altar more. Back at my desk, I wrote the last line of the official report, the sentence that lets paperwork close its eyes. Recommended long-term monitoring, subsidence risk mitigated with plug. Then I opened my field notebook and wrote the sentence I will never file. You can fill a tunnel with concrete, but you cannot plug a habit. When I wake now at 2:17 or 3:11 for no reason, it is not because of the smell of damp, though it stays. It is because I can hear someone counting softly, patient as water, and every few nights as I drift toward that soft mineral dark, I think I hear a child's voice practicing the same small word I saw scratched beneath 2 stick figures joined by a line, friend. I retired from the Parks Division in 2021 with a respectable pile of laminated badges and a left knee that predicted rain better than the weather radio. Retirement didn't take. By the second spring, I was back doing seasonal maintenance contracts for the county. Brush cutting, signposting, walking condemned trails to confirm they were still condemned. The work paid in quiet and small checks. That suited me. Blackberry Hollow showed up on my work order in October of 2024 with 3 lines of instruction. Assess structures at former company village. Photograph hazards. Post no trespassing. The village sat in a fold of the southern West Virginia hills outside Welch. A coal camp abandoned since the late 1940s when the tipple shut and the company pulled out like a tide. I'd heard stories, same as everyone. Kids gone missing during the last weeks. A collapse somewhere in the drift. A caretaker who refused to leave. But coal towns collect stories the way porches collect leaves. Most of them rot into nothing. The access road was a rumor more than a road, rutted and green. I parked a quarter-mile short and walked in under gray sky, the kind that makes noon feel like late afternoon. The village appeared in order. Rows of one-room miners' houses leaning at identical angles, porch roofs buckled, windows punched dark. The old commissary stood at the center like a stern teacher, slate letters still visible over the door. Blackberry Supply Co. and someone had once scraped the paint to sell. I took out my county camera and did the first, dumb necessary thing. I stood in the road and photographed the scene. Liability likes wide shots. Then I set a pace and started the hazard loop. The houses were empty in the way structures get when wind finds ways through them. Wallpaper peeled like tongues, the smell of mouse droppings and mildew, floorboards that bowed under boots. I marked 3 for imminent collapse, hung orange ribbon on nails and tried to make the work feel like work. At the second row, I heard feet running. Light steps, quick. The trip of children cutting corners you can't see. I froze. The sound came from inside the house to my left, crossed the room and stopped near the front door. No wind, no animal scuttle. A beat later, a low giggle from somewhere behind the chimney. Not ghosts, sound. Real weighty sound shaped by breath. County maintenance, I called, because training never leaves. Anyone in there? This structure isn't safe. Silence landed hard, then lifted. I waited 30 seconds more, head tilted. The way you listen for a branch deciding to break. Nothing. I stepped onto the porch and shone my light through the door frame. The floor was dusted in coal soot so fine my boot prints would have been a lecture. Across that black powder ran a scatter of small footprints, 10 or 12 distinct paths moving room to room, heel and toe clean, not smudged. Barefoot, child-sized, fresh. The edges still crisp. I photographed them until I felt like I was stealing upstairs, because I went upstairs when I shouldn't have more prints. Also, a pile of bedding made from blankets and cut sleeping bags, each the size of a child, nested in a corner where the roof hadn't yet let the sky through. A plastic grocery sack held wrappers from shelf-stable food bought this decade. The paper label on a bottled drink had a design I recognized from a chain that didn't exist when the camp closed. I backed out slow. Outside, the light had shifted toward evening without the sun moving at all. Blackberry vines climbed the steps in a way I'd have called pretty, if my heart weren't running steps of its own. I made the commissary my next stop because old rules say you go to the center when you don't know where else to go. The double doors were there and not, one hung stupid, the other propped open by a rock. Inside, the space was bigger than I remembered from other camps, long shelves bare as bones. What took my breathing away were the walls. Charcoal drawings covered them shoulder high, stick figures with round heads and long arms, a row of small figures holding hands, a black oval with lines radiating from it like a mouth or a mine. In places, the charcoal had been wet and dragged by fingers. Red streaks showed where someone had used something else that had dried darker. Dozens of images, hundreds, some fresh, some faded. The repetition made them a language. At the far end, beyond the counter, hung a publicity poster from the 1940s, the kind that once told workers to buy war bonds. Several faces had been rubbed out to gray ovals. Above the poster, more drawings, a lovely, clumsy map of the village. Little squares for houses, a rectangle for the commissary, a black line for the drift mouth. In later drawings, the drift mouth had thick lines across it, closed. In the last drawing, new lines appeared leading into the hills like veins. I lifted the camera. My hand shook enough to make the first picture blur. The second was better. The third caught movement at the doorway. I turned. They were kids at first glance. 10, maybe 12, jammed shoulder to shoulder in the opening, bare feet black to the ankle, clothes composed of pieces of clothes. Faces smeared in soot in the way people paint shadows over what they don't want seen. They stared at me without looking. Their eyes didn't fix. They rested. No fear. No curiosity. A kind of animal patience I've seen in deer that survive long winters. Behind them, a woman stepped forward like a speech that finally left the mouth. She was older than the village. Her dress might have been blue once. The apron over it had been white so long ago that the dirt had eaten it back into the world. Her face lined like dry creek bed, eyes that had practiced being stone in one. "You don't belong," she said, her voice a low coal seam of sound. Not unkind, simply a boundary. "I'm here to post signs," I said, "because what else do you say to someone who belongs to the walls? Condemnation. For safety." "They said that before," she answered. "Safety, they left us to be safe. We were safe without them. Now we are safe if you leave again." "I heard running," I said, because admitting what you hear sometimes makes it smaller. "Are there children here?" The word tasted dumb in my mouth. She looked at the drawings. "They draw," she said. "The ones left." "The ones we keep? Who is we?" Her mouth shaped something that wasn't a smile and wasn't not. "The forgotten." I don't know what possessed me then. Habit, maybe. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the camera without thinking, the way I document when I want someone not me to know later. The older woman's head turned in one smooth pivot and the children drew in a breath together like a school of fish. "No." Her voice filled the commissary. "You do not take us. You will go." I did something dumb and necessary. "I can bring help," I said. She shook her head. "Help made the leaving. Help will make the taking. We keep our own." A kid on the left rubbed their face and left a clean streak on their cheek. The skin beneath was young and ordinary and human. "I'll go," I said finally. "I'll tell them this place is unsafe." You will tell them nothing, the woman said, but softer. Because nothing is what they can hold. I left on my feet instead of my dignity. At the road, the vines looked closer somehow, the light nearly gone. I posted 2 no trespassing signs on fence posts that weren't there in the morning. They looked like prayer flags. Back at the truck, I sat with the engine off until the night made me feel like something you could pocket. When I turned the key, laughter ran across the village like wind stirring a field. Not mean, not happy. Practice laughter. The kind you try on until it fits. I drove out without looking in the rear view. Because if you look, you take, and if you take, you owe. That night, I wrote the county report in the language that passed. Structures unstable. Immediate fencing recommended. Condemn and seal. Then I opened a second file I wouldn't send and wrote the other language. They're still here. They never left. County brought me back the next day with a deputy and a guy from historical preservation who wore new boots and a face that wanted this to be a grant opportunity. The deputy, Atwell, was all careful eyes and polite posture. Good cop. He kept a hand near the holster without putting it on. The preservation guy, Carter, asked me if the commissary had interpretive potential. Sure, I said. If your interpretation includes don't go in. We arrived at 10. The hollow wore the same light, the sky the same cheap gray. Fresh handprints showed on the glassless windows like breath was a stain. Atwell called out before we crossed the commissary threshold. Sheriff's office. And waited for an answer that didn't come. Inside, the drawings were there. More of them than yesterday, or maybe I hadn't seen all of it. New charcoal lines layered over old, the map now crowded with stick figures moving between houses and the black oval of the drift. In the latest edition, someone had drawn a rectangle around the commissary and thickened the walls. Stay. Atwell snapped photos with his body cam. Carter snapped with his phone, then slowed as the images added up to a weight that didn't feel like a grant. He paused at a panel on the far wall. These are... He started, then stopped because his polite word for children got lost between us. We found the sleeping nests again, more now, or should have been. Fresh blankets, a plastic tub of clothes sorted by size, a steel pot with a layer of the kind of stew you make from cans and regret, clean aluminum foil wads. Someone had eaten recently. The air held a faint sweet smell I couldn't place. Soap, Atwell said quietly behind me, or shampoo, something floral. He bent to pick up a blue bottle, then thought better of it. He pointed with a pen. Store brand. New. In the commissary, Carter found the first stash. In a back room behind shelving, a square cut out of the floor was covered with an old door. He pulled it up with 2 fingers. Underneath lay a cache, canned goods, water jugs, a stack of batteries, a spool of wire, a bolt cutter. On top, arranged with care like a display, 15 lunchbox-sized packets of applesauce. Not taken from a store in 1947, bought from one last week. No dust, Atwell said. He put the door back as gently as I've seen anyone handle a thing that wasn't theirs. A sound interrupted us, a shuffle and a muffled knock from deeper in the building, followed by a hush you could almost parse as words. Quiet, quiet, quiet. We all froze. Atwell looked to me. Old habits die hard. I nodded toward the corridor. The old woman stepped into the commissary again like she'd been standing in the cool and waiting for us to remember how to act. Same dress, same apron, same face carved out of years. She wasn't a ghost. She was a fact. Ma'am, Atwell said, voice pitched for respect. We need to check on the welfare of any minors here. Are there children? She ignored the question and studied Carter the way you study a loud tool. You'll put signs, she said to me, not him. New boards, new locks. County wants fencing, she shook her head. Fencing keeps you in. We need you out, Atwell tried again. We can help with food, supplies, medical. Your help forgets names, she said, not cruelly. Your help left and called that saving. Who are the children with you? I asked. Because sometimes you point at the center and hope the circle forms around it. They're not with me, she said. I am with them, Carter murmured. We should contact social services, like a man talking to himself to keep from having to talk to someone else. Do your contacting somewhere else, she said to him, and I watched a man with a graduate degree deflate like a tire that found a nail. Ma'am, Atwell said, we have to verify that no one is in immediate danger. And if they are, she asked, you will take them to a room with light at night and say it is safe. They will learn the ceiling. You will not learn them. Atwell swallowed. He was a good cop. He wanted forms to become help. "Please," he said. She turned her head in that smooth, jointless way and whistled something so soft I almost missed it. Children appeared in the doorway again, arranged by height without thinking. One boy, maybe 9, held a string with a tin can at the end, the poor man's telephone game. He watched Atwell without blinking. The others watched me, because I had been there first and therefore was the one to be left or tolerated. "I'm posting," I said, finally, because the job sometimes is to be the thing you are in a place, even when the place refuses to be yours.
"Today, right now," she nodded.
"Post, then go." Carter lifted his phone. She looked at him once and he lowered it as if the device had gained weight. He put it in his breast pocket like a confession. Outside, we dug holes for metal signposts. The ground gave easily, like it had agreed to this lie too. The kids watched from distance, at the corner of buildings behind porch posts above us in the second-floor window, where the glass had been replaced by air. In the dust below that window, fresh footprints crowded in. I measured one with my fingers. The way you measure when you don't want to. Seem like you are, at some point, the kind of moment that happens in stories so often it feels planted, the air, changed, lighter, warm. So, sound of children came again, not running this time, singing the odd, flat melody you get when the tune is learned phonetically. Words weren't English. They were a rhythm. They sang 3 verses, then stopped on a syllable that made no sound at the end. We finished posting and carried our discipline back to the vehicles like water. Atwell tried one last time. "Ma'am," he called toward the commissary. "We'll be back." With a caseworker. "We want to help." "You will be back with paper," she said from the doorway. "Bring food instead and leave it where you don't watch us eat." Carter looked at me like I'd whispered instructions we both should have known. I said nothing. My job had shrunk to signs. On the way out, at the mouth of the road, I saw something that made my morning settle into evening all at once. A neat set of stacked stones on the shoulder, small, large, small, with a clean braid laid over the top stone. 2 colors of hair. Fresh, the way hair looks before the sun changes it. I looked at Atwell. He looked at me. Neither of us touched it. At the office, we filed. Structures unsafe. Trespassers present. Recommend fencing and enforcement patrols. Carter added significant historical fabric like a man trying to befriend a hurricane. Atwell filed a welfare referral. The county promised a multi-agency visit within the week. 2 days later, the visit happened. They called me that night. "We found evidence," the supervisor said. "No people." "What kind of evidence?" "Sleeping areas. Food stash. Drawings on walls, and the woman?" "Negative." "Kids?" "Negative." He exhaled like a man stepping down off something too high. "We posted more signs," he added, as if signs feed people. I drove out alone the following morning, which wasn't in the work order but was in something older. The new signs were up, bright, reflective. The commissary walls were still covered, but several panels had been scrubbed with something wet until the images ran like blood. The sleeping nests had been emptied. The food cache was gone. At the doorway, the old woman had left me a gift or a warning. A plastic tub with 6 packets of applesauce, a box of bandages, and a child's glove, gray, size small. Beside it lay a crude drawing made on cardboard with charcoal, the map again. This time a line ran out of the village and up into a ridge I hadn't walked yet. At the end of that line, 2 stick figures stood together beneath a triangle that could be a roof or a mountain. Between them, a long braid traced like a rope. I carried the tub to the truck and left it there unopened. I am not a courier. I am a man who posts signs. That night I dreamed the sound of feet over old wood. I woke with my hand on the wall, feeling for breath like stone keeps. When I turned on my phone, there was a photo in my gallery I had not taken. The frame showed the commissary interior from a low angle and a child's hand in the corner holding a tin can on a string. The timestamp read 10 minutes after I'd left. There were no footprints in my house. Not then. A week later, County put a chain-link fence around the village. 8-foot panels with barbed wire hats. The press release said public safety, unstable structures, remediation under review. The Historical Society published a blog post with sepia photos and the phrase, forgotten heritage. No one used the word children, stayed away until the first real cold. November put a skin on the puddles and turned breath into something you could see. I went back with a coil of chain and a sign the county asked me to hang on the new fence. No entry. Environmental hazard. Sometimes we choose our lies by what the printer can produce. The gate was locked. The fence had already learned what all fences learn in Appalachia. The mountains do not consider them law. A section at the back had been lifted and replaced so carefully the clips looked like they'd never bent. I noted it down without writing what it meant. Inside, the village felt wrong in the way rooms feel wrong after someone has moved the furniture an inch to the left. The houses sat the same. The commissary held. The drawings had been added to, new panels, more maps. The latest layer included shapes I hadn't seen before. Long rectangles underground connected by short lines like rooms linked by tunnels. At the edge of one rectangle, someone had drawn a small circle filled with crosshatch. I thought of a vent. The laughter came again, but muffled, like the building itself had learned to keep heat and sound. I stood still, palms flat on the wood of the counter. The old woman appeared as if she had been stored behind the door until needed. She looked thinner. Or maybe I was just remembering more fat. "Why the fence?" she asked, as if I had the answer in my pocket with the chain. "Because the county only knows how to say keep out," I said. She considered that. "Then learn a new thing," she said. "Bring what we ask. Leave it go. What do you ask?" She tilted her head toward the back, toward the rooms where the neat stacks grew. "Salt, oil, flour, soap, bread, the one with the bear on the bag." She meant the white bread with the childhood logo. "I'm not a supply line," I said, more to hear what my voice sounded like than to correct her. "I hang signs." She looked at my hands, scarred, dirty, old. "You carry fine," she said. "Better than paper. I could bring social—" "No," she said, soft but absolute. "Do not bring takers. Kids need doctors," I said. "Doctors need answers," she said. "We do not have the ones they like." I thought of bones under drift roofs and records burned by neglect, of caseworkers carrying too many folders and not enough time. I thought of the two-color braid and the way a child sings when the song holds the rhythm of hunger. "I'll leave food," I said, "where you showed me." I hated how the words felt like a contract and a betrayal at the same time. She nodded once, a royalty I couldn't recognize, and turned away. The children were not behind her this time. They were above, the second-floor window framed by their heads and hands. One held a tin can on a string and put it to their ear like a telephone. The string ran inside to the dark. I raised my hand, palm out. The child copied me exactly. Palm flat, fingers splayed like a starfish. The tin can clinked as it knocked softly against the sill. I hung the sign on the fence and drove to the gas station 10 miles down the mountain. I bought a list that would fit in the bed of my truck. Flour, oil, salt, boxed soap. 10 loaves with the bear on the bag. Applesauce cups, bandages, batteries. I paid in cash and told the clerk nothing. He looked at the pile and said, "Church?" I said yes. It felt less like a lie than some truths. Back at the hollow, I didn't go through the gate. I left the boxes and bags on the shoulder of the road where the stacked stones sat. The braid was gone. In its place lay a short length of twine tied at both ends in a loop. A man's bracelet? A promise or a trap? I did not pick it up. I walked the fence until the back where the clips had been lifted. I didn't lift them. I set a small bell on the wire instead, the kind fishermen use to hear a bite. The sound it made when the wind took it was almost nothing. 2 days later, the county called. "We've had reports," the supervisor said, and used the voice people use when they want to be angry and tired at once. "A contractor is delivering supplies to trespassers." "Sounds generous," I said, neutral. "You need to stop, and what if I don't?" I asked, not brave, just curious where the words would go. "You'll lose the contract," he said, and then, softer, "and it won't change anything." He was right on one count. I stopped. Or I said I did, which is a kind of stopping. The bell on the fence disappeared the next week. The signs remained. They always do. Winter worked into the village like a rumor and then a fact. The river glassed at the edges. A flood in January tore up part of the road and made the county consider closing the area off for good. I argued for nothing because the argument is older than me and longer than my life. In February, a hunter 2 hollows over found a small blue raincoat tangled in laurel. He turned it in. The tag inside bore a name written in careful block letters. The name matched nothing in the state database. The tag of the manufacturer had a batch code you could trace to a big box store. Dates aligned that shouldn't have. I went out one last time before spring. The fence wore new dents. The commissary had been patched from the inside with plywood, the kind you cut with hands that know tools. The wall drawings had grown into each other until the room felt like standing inside a mind that refused to forget. The map now showed lines that left Blackberry Hollow and joined other hollows, little circles like nodes. A network built out of need and stubborn air. On the floor near the counter, a small stack of items waited exactly where I'd left food months ago. One slice of bread, a clean bandage still wrapped, an applesauce cup with a spoon rubber banded to it. On top of the stack lay a photograph printed on glossy paper. It had been taken from the road looking down toward my parked truck. In the foreground, out of focus, a child's hand held a tin can attached to string. In the reflection on the truck window, a gray-haired man, me, stared back, camera at his chest. The caption was drawn in charcoal on the back in a hand that had learned letters from a package. "You see us, we see you." I left the photograph where it was and walked out under a sky that finally bothered to be blue. At the gate, the bell was back, tied with a new loop of twine. It rang once, clean, as I passed. Then it was just a bell again. The county finished the fence and the press releases. The Historical Society moved on to a different ruin more agreeable to PowerPoint. Every so often, a deputy swings by and writes no activity on a line that may or may not mean what it says. A sign by the highway tells motorists to visit the new mining museum down county, where the lights are fluorescent and the mannequins wear clean clothes. I keep a box by my door with a list taped to the lid. Flour, oil, salt, bread with the bear, applesauce, soap, bandages, batteries. On certain mornings when the weather turns mean, fog that won't rise, rain that sounds like coins, I put the box in the bed of the truck and drive a road I don't intend to drive. Sometimes I leave the box where the stones stack themselves. Sometimes I turn around before the hollow and go home. I am a man with a knee that tells me when it will storm. I am a man who posts signs. Both truths fit in the same body. At night, from the middle room of my house where my coins and photographs sleep, I sometimes hear the faint jingle of a tiny bell. Maybe it's the furnace. Maybe it's a neighbor's dog's collar. I lie still and count. It rings once more, or it doesn't. That's the thing about listening. Sometimes it's just you inside your own skull. Sometimes the sound is shared. If you ask me now about Blackberry Hollow, I can show you my county report and it will say what it needs to say for doors to close properly. Unsafe structures, fence installed, remediation pending. If you ask me what's true, I can't give you a sentence that fits a sign. I can tell you I saw eyes that had learned not to hope for official versions of help. I can tell you charcoal can carry a map farther than a surveyor's chalk. I can tell you I stood in a room where the walls taught themselves how not to forget. And I can tell you this: some places raise their children themselves. When the adults go, the place and the children make a deal. It's not one I would choose for my own, but it is a contract older than any county line. On the back of the photograph I didn't take, beneath the caption, another word had been added later in a different hand. Darker, the letters pressed hard enough to scar the paper: friend.